Right, we're ready to go.
Okay, thank you. Let's call this meeting to order and do a roll call.
All right. Uh, Member Schreiber?
Here.
Member Salt, Member Salty?
Here.
Member Solberg? Member Watton?
Here.
Chair Manning?
Here.
Okay, we have five.
All right, so I'll read the introduction and open to the public hearing. Good evening. Tonight, we're holding a public hearing regarding the application number HDR-23-03 for a Class 3 Historic Design Review at 4865.
Excuse me, Chair Manning? We first have public comment on non-agenda related items.
All right, so is there any public items not on the agenda?
I don't see any. We can move on.
Then number 3, approval of draft meeting notes from August 15th. Motion for that?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Second? You all in favor? Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Do we need a motion then to change those two?
So I don't think we need a motion to change the order on the agenda, do we?
Yes, you do need to.
Okay,
Yeah, you
so
need to decide that as,
I'd like to make the motion to change item number 5 to number 4. Move that one ahead. So we do the windows first and then the commercial building second.
I will second that motion.
All right, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So then, how do I do this, right? All right, so let's go back to the introduction and open this public hearing. First 2 lines I've already read, but I'll do it again. Good evening. Tonight, we're holding a public hearing regarding the application number HDR-23-03 for a Class 2 Historic Design Review at 4865 Willamette Falls Drive. This is a quasi-judicial decision. Unlike in legislative hearings where personal opinion may come into play, quasi-judicial rulings must be grounded in the relevant code, and if the application meets the code, the board must approve it. The hearing will proceed as follows. After the preliminary legal matters, staff will make the presentation, followed by the application, then members of the audience. Finally, there will be time for rebuttal by the applicant. If you'd like to speak regarding an agenda item, please complete a sign-in testimony form located at the table in the hallway and submit it to the staff now. You must fill out a separate form for each agenda item. When you're called to testify, you'll have up to 3 minutes to speak. The applicant will have up to 20 minutes initially, plus 10 minutes for rebuttal. The board members may ask questions of the applicant, staff, or anyone else who testifies. I now call the meeting, I now call to order a public hearing, and I will ask the city attorney to cover any preliminary legal matters.
Thank you, Chair Manning. The applicant has the burden of proving that the application is consistent with the City of West Lynn's Community Development Code, Comprehensive Plan, and any applicable municipal code provisions. The criteria that must be addressed in this hearing are CDC Chapter 25 Historic District and CDC Chapter 99 Decision-Making Procedures Quasi-Judicial. Any testimony, argument, or evidence that speakers give us must be directed at these criteria or at some other criteria in the code or comprehensive plan which you believe should apply to this decision. If your testimony would be repetitious, but you'd like the opportunity to appeal the decision, you must sign the sign-in testimony form. Only those who have appeared before the Historic Review Board in person or in writing will have standing to appeal the item to the City Council. Prior to the conclusion of the first public hearing on an application, the applicant or anyone who takes part in the hearing may request a continuance or ask that the record be left open to permit and present additional information. If there is such a request, the Historic Review Board must either continue the public hearing to a date certain or leave the record open for at least 7 days for additional written evidence, argument, or testimony. Failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements of or evidence sufficient to allow the board and the parties an opportunity to respond to the issue precludes appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals based on that issue. Failure of the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues related to proposed conditions of approval with sufficient specificity to allow the city or its designee to respond to the issue precludes an action for damages in circuit court. So first we'll deal with conflicts of interest. So the question to members of the Historic Review Board are, does any member of the Historic Review Board wish to declare a potential or actual conflict of interest? And also, does any member wish to declare any bias? So I'm seeing Commissioner Watson has raised his hand.
Yes, I lease office space from the applicant, and I also do business in a different aspect of their business, but I've decided to recuse myself from this meeting.
It's mixed up.
Thank you. So we'll use that. We'll include that in the minutes, Commissioner Watson, as a declaration of a potential conflict of interest or a bias or both. Which would you prefer?
I'd hate for it to be looked at as a potential bias, but that's probably makes the most sense.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone else on the board wish to raise a potential or actual conflict of interest or declare a bias? I'm not seeing anyone in the room raising their hand. Am I missing someone?
No, you're not. No one's raising their hand.
Great, thank you. So then the next question to the members of the commission who are going to hear the matter tonight. Does any member of the Historic Review Board wish to report any site visits or ex parte contacts in relation to this application? Chair Manning?
I've walked the site a few times and looked at it even again since our last meeting when we discussed. So,
And have you noticed anything on your site visits that is conflicting with or in addition to what you see within the materials tonight, Commissioner Manning?
no.
Thank you. And if something comes to mind during the course of the hearing as presentation is made, if you do come up with or recall something that you saw during your site visits, please declare that at the appropriate time.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So we'll ask at this time, does any member of the audience wish to challenge the jurisdiction of the Historic Review Board to hear this matter? And Lynn, I rely on you if there are any people in the audience who might be raising their hand to express interest in challenging a member of the HRB or the board itself.
Mr. Monahan, we do not have any hands raised in the audience tonight.
Thank you very much, Lynn. Then we'll move, and there are none that are raised on the participant list that I'm viewing online. So does any member of the audience wish to challenge the impartiality or ex parte disclosures of any member of the Historic Review Board? Lynn, I rely on you again.
I don't see, Mr. Monahan, I don't see any.
Great, thank you very
in
much.
chambers.
So there are no challenges. So Chair Manning, that concludes the legal matters. I'll turn the meeting back to you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So we have moved windows ahead to do the staff report for that.
Yes, please. If we could have the PowerPoint launched. Give us 1 second. Oh. Okay, well, this is getting teed up. I'll just introduce myself for the record. I'm John Floyd, Senior Planner with the City of West Linn Planning Department. We're here tonight to talk about a Class 2 historic design review. It's in front of the Historic Review Board because more than 100 square feet of facade area is being affected. Therefore, it moves from a staff decision to a Historic Review Board decision. And so, okay, so can we get this full screen? We're getting this. Yeah. That's possible, but if not, we can make do. There we go. Okay. Sorry. Thank you very much. Let's see. It is not. So if you could just move to the next slide. So yeah, so again, as I mentioned earlier, Class 2 Historic Design Review, the applicable criteria are found in Chapter 25, which is the Historic District Design Design Guidelines. These apply whether or not a property is located within the Willamette Falls Drive Historic District or if it's individually listed, which is the case here tonight. Next slide, please. So the project site's located on Willamette Falls Drive, just westerly of the Arch Bridge there, sort of backs up to the mill property, and it's not far from Historic City Hall. It's on a block of about seven homes, which of varying ages, but most are approximately 100 years old. Of the 7, 4 are listed locally, and 1 is on the National Register. And this one's in the approximate center of the block. Next slide, please. So the historic inventory notes this as the Luthwaite residence. It was built circa 1914 and 1915. The exact dates vary depending upon the inventory being consulted. And also noted as being in the bungalow or craftsman style. Again, the description varies slightly based upon the actual inventory. It's one of 3 structures on the block being associated with the Luthwaite family. As I mentioned earlier, it's one of 4 listed structures, some of which have been converted to commercial uses since then. But in regards to historic matters, use doesn't come into play so much as design. So next slide, please. So the proposal before you tonight is the replacement of 16 existing windows of various ages. Some are original, some are not. The applicant has documented the poor condition of the windows in their application and how some of them deviate from the historic design. The proposed replacements are to match the existing proportion, light pattern, glass color, trim, mullions, and muntins. However, they are requesting a design exception for to use Marvin Ultrich's fiberglass in lieu of wood. This is a common request, and so the HRB has to make a decision on 2 criteria. One is, does the application meet the criteria for window replacement, and does it also meet the criteria for the design exception? So next slide, please. So this is just a snapshot from the application. This slide indicates the affected windows and gives the HRB a general sense of their condition and location. Next slide, please. So this is the approval criteria for window replacement. And it says replacement of windows or window sashes shall be consistent with the original historic appearance and material, including the profile, sill trim, window pane, light pattern, glass color, profile of the mullions and muntins, and method of operation. And so in reviewing this as documented in the staff report, staff generally finds that this criteria to be met with the exception of material, which is why we're also talking about the design exception. Next slide, please. Oh, I forgot to mention one thing. There was one exception to the compliance with the approval criteria, is that the application didn't call out whether or not the the windows would use the sort of modern style of the grill between the glass panes, the double pane windows, or if they'd be simulated on the outside, which provides more of a 3D appearance. And so staff's recommendation is a condition of approval requiring the use of simulated divided lights, just to give that three-dimensional appearance and shading. So if the HRB was okay with that, that the condition of approval would be added to do that. So next slide, please. So the for design exception for material substitution, the HRB has to find that the substitute material conveys the form, design, scale, detailing, and overall appearance of the historic material, and that the application of the substitute does not damage, destroy, or obscure historic features. So in this case, only the windows are being affected by this application. They're proposing no other alterations to the structure. They're making this request based upon both durability and cost, and so and this seems like a reasonable request. But again, the HRB can ask for additional information if you think there's more required. But there's a cut sheet of the material in the staff report, and so we can certainly open up the questions then. Next slide, please. And so, in conclusion, no public comments were provided to staff prior to the hearing. As I mentioned before, if HRB finds that the criteria are met, staff would recommend two conditions. One is conformance with the submitted plans, and the second, use of simulated divided lights. Otherwise, I'd just like to turn it over to the HRB for questions at this time. So thank you.
Anyone have any questions?
Yeah.
John, I'm not familiar with the fiberglass material. They provide any samples of what the material looks like or what the grain is or anything like that?
I have not, so that's something we don't have. So only the cut sheet. That's something, if the HRB requires, we could, the applicant's in the room, and that's something we could see if they could provide. We could continue the hearing for that if that's something the HRB needs to make a decision. So.
That would be nice to have something like that, just to see grain and texture, because we have approved other materials before, but they've, kind of met that grain and texture requirement, so.
Yeah.
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 Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I will also note that the applicant's in the room if you want to speak with the applicant directly as well. So.
Okay. Who is the applicant? Oh, hi. So, yeah. Anybody have any more questions for staff?
We'll just confirm, those are paintable, right? All
I-
fiberglass is paintable?
I understand that, yes. So.
Okay. So no more questions for staff, then, owner, I guess. So you probably heard what I said, with texture and grain and things like that. Do you have anything? Oh, sorry. Yeah.
In the back of material, the fiberglass is textured and grained. It's also comes in a wide variety of colors. So the chosen color is white to match the currently painted windows, which I believe were originally just stained wood.
So,
How do you feel about the division of the lights or the windows with fake divisions?
I didn't really have a strong opinion about the divisions for the windows. Most of it's for comfort in the home and sound and removing a lead hazard from the home as well, because we've got a newborn baby.
do you have any testimony you'd like to give on this to us, or?
Not in particular. I tried to provide as much detailed information as possible to try to adhere to the historic code. We've been working on restoring the home, at least on the inside so far. So we're hoping to stay there for a long time and make it a comfortable home to live in.
Nice. Um,
Question for you. So it looked like from the photos we provided that some of the windows might be original, probably not that many from the photos. Do you have a plan to maintain or keep those windows in case future homeowners want to restore those windows and put them back in?
I had not planned on keeping the majority of the windows. They're going to have to remove a lot of the internal hardware, I believe, for the weights are corroded. We have attempted to repair some of the old windows. They would need pretty much full replacement of a lot of the casing and the weights to restore it back to original window. I'd say about half the windows have been replaced at some point. There's probably maybe 6 windows that are original in the home. Otherwise, they've been either fully replaced with pictured windows, or they've had to have their glass replaced. And the wood itself is dry rotted in a lot of cases, including the sills for the windows. So it'd be mostly Bondo if you wanted to keep the original windows.
Although there are actually companies that will restore the entire window, keeping the same glass, and they'll restore the rest of the window with new wood. But just, there's been neighbors who've done that.
We
Actually,
have.
it's very expensive. I know.
Yeah,
that, but-
it's incredibly expensive. We have attempted to do the repairs ourselves. We have replaced entire window panes on a couple of the windows and redone the glazing and painting and paint stripping and sanding. They just are not the most functional things at this point. So we're trying to make the home as good as we can and keep it to the historic requirements. So.
Just a recommendation, it's not on the requirements of the law, but as a homeowner who's had a historic home and had all the windows replaced and ripped out, I wish they would have saved a 1 or 2 windows in the attic just to see, so we can duplicate them in the future if we wanted to.
Sure. Well, we have
Just a recommendation. It's not on the part of the requirement. But
yeah, our dining room has probably the nicest original windows in the home. So it's got 2 nice double hung windows and then a large picture window with leaded glass and then another large leaded glass window on the, I believe the right side of the dining room. So we're trying to keep the nice windows that are still original. I believe maybe 3 or 4 are still original on the upstairs, but we could hang on to them, but we could just put them into storage or remove the glass and keep the frames.
Any discussion from HRB?
it's hard without seeing the actual materials. It's hard without actually seeing the actual physical materials.
Chair, you do need, if you're moving on to deliberations, you need to close public
Oh,
hearing.
yeah. All right. So yeah, let's close the public testimony. Okay, so that was applicant's presentation. I'm sorry. Is there any public testimony on this one, Lynn? No?
No, there's none.
Okay. So no public testimony. There's no rebuttal by applicant. Addressing requests for continuances. Any questions of staff for any of us? No? All right, so
So I have one little, just a comment, John, and you know this, it's so nice if we can get physical pieces, and you already know that, I know, because you often encourage folks to get physical
Yes,
pieces in, because model numbers don't mean anything to us,
I understand
and
that.
names don't mean anything to us, so you already know that, I know, so.
Okay. Okay.
So to close this hearing. So I'm going to close this public hearing. Okay. All right. In deliberations. Does any board member wish to comment or make a motion? And the options are motion to approve, Motion to approve, subject to conditions of approval, or motion to deny?
I would just say the fiberglass is the most appropriate thing besides wood to use currently. I think has become prohibitively expensive as of late. Fixing old windows that are 100 years old seem prohibitively expensive to a homeowner. My only recommendation would be the false articulation of window, I think is no longer appropriate. It's a stylistic only application and it's fake. I think we could move past it, but that's personal preference. So I would go either way. It wouldn't hold me one way or the other. But I would make a motion to approve the windows.
Is that with conditions for you, either of you? Your motion was to approve it. Was that with the condition that John was suggesting?
I'd keep them, whatever they feel is appropriate.
Okay.
So the question, there's two questions there, to be honest. One is just to approve it.
Well,
And the
yeah.
other is to approve it with the simulated divided lights that have that 3D effect to it.
I would leave that that's fine. I would leave that to the applicant. So I'd approve both of those as staff has recommended.
And yours? Okay. All right. All in favor?
I just want clarification really on what we're voting on. Are we voting on the condition that John recommended with the divided light or without? I was a little confused on what that was. Okay.
It'd be with.
All right.
What staff recommended.
Yes, perfect.
So all in favor?
You want to do a roll call vote?
Yeah, roll call vote. Sorry, Lynn?
I'm sorry. Say that again.
Roll call vote.
Oh, okay. Member Salty,
Yes.
Member Schreiber,
Yes.
Member Solberg, Member Steele,
Yes.
Member Watton,
Yes.
okay, we have 5-0. I'm sorry, Chair Manning,
Yes.
6-0. He recused himself from this one?
Didn't you recuse yourself, Tom?
I think perhaps Commissioner Watton was confused as to which item we were starting on.
And
Because
I
he's-
apologize for that. After I did, I realized that we had switched the priority list, but I can recuse myself from this one at this point legally. That's fine.
Well, it's probably best that you do, even though it sounds like it was an error, your vote's not necessary for this one, Tom.
I apologize. I'll just I'll abstain from this vote.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you, everyone. 5-0.
HDR 2303 passes 5-0.
All right, so now I'm going to reopen public hearing. Good evening. Tonight we are holding a public hearing regarding the application number. This would be DR 2301. And it's located at 1919 through 1949 Willamette Falls Drive. Class 2 design review for new commercial building. This is a quasi judicial decision. Unlike in legislative hearings where personal opinion may come into play, quasi judicial rulings may be grounded in the relevant code. And if the application meets the code, the board must approve it. The hearing will proceed as follows. After the preliminary legal matters, staff will make a presentation followed by the application, then the members of the audience. Finally, there will be time for rebuttal by the applicant. If you'd like to speak regarding an agenda item, please complete the sign-in testimony form located at the table in the hallway and submit it to staff now. You must fill out a separate form for each agenda item. When you're called to testify, you'll have up to 3 minutes to speak. The applicant will have 20 minutes initially, plus 10 minutes for rebuttal. The board members may ask questions of the applicant, staff, or anyone else who testifies. I now call to order the public hearing and will ask the city attorney to cover the preliminary legal matters.
Thank you, Chair Manning. The applicant has the burden of proving that the application is consistent with the City of West Lynn's Community Development Code, Comprehensive Plan, and any applicable municipal code provision. The criteria that must be addressed in this hearing are CDC Chapter 58, Willamette Falls Drive Commercial Design District, and CDC Chapter 99, Decision-Making Procedures, Quasi-Judicial. Any testimony, argument, or evidence that speakers give us must be directed at these criteria or at any other criteria in the code or comprehensive plan which you believe should apply to this decision. Failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to allow the Planning Commission and the parties an opportunity to respond to the issue precludes appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals based on that issue. Failure of the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues related to proposed conditions of approval with sufficient specificity to allow the city or its designee to respond to the issue precludes an action for damages in circuit court. So at this point, does any member of the Historic Review Board wish to declare a potential or actual conflict of interest or a bias? Board Member Watson.
I'd like to just recuse myself on the basis of potential bias.
Thank you. Does any other member of the Historic Review Board have a declaration to make? I'm not seeing any hands raised either on the list of participants or within the room. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you. So at this point, does any member of the Historic Review Board wish to report any site visits or ex parte contacts regarding this application?
So that's where I was at last time. It wasn't the windows. It was this one. I've walked this site once prior to the previous meeting and once prior to this meeting. And to John's comments before, I didn't see anything that is different than the package or anything that staff has provided already.
Great. Thank you, Chair Manning.
And I live a block away from this property. I see it probably 2 or 3 times a day. So I've driven by it, never in anything beyond just a driving by, but I've seen the property many times.
Great. Thank you. At this point, we'll ask, does any member of the audience wish to challenge the jurisdiction of the Historic Review Board to hear this matter? And Lynn, I rely on you if there are people in the audience that might be indicating an interest to raise a challenge.
Thank you, Mr. Monahan. We don't have anybody in the audience wanting to make a challenge.
Great, thank you. Then we'll go to the final challenge, which is, does any member of the audience wish to challenge the impartiality of any member of the Historic Review Board or comment on the ex parte disclosure?
Mr. Monahan, nobody in the audience wishes to challenge that.
Very good. Thank you, Lynn. So with that, Chair Manning, I'll turn the public hearing back to you.
Staff report and presentation.
Yeah. Yes, thank you. If you could pull up the PowerPoint. In the meantime, I'll just, again, for the record, my name is John Floyd. I'm with the West Linn Planning Department. And again, we're here for a Class 2 design review. This will look familiar to the board as this appeared before you in June. It's a unique situation in that this is a remand from the Planning Commission. I'll go over into the exact details once the PowerPoint comes up, but tonight's hearing is really a focus on a new design exception that was added subsequent to your hearing on this back in June. So. Okay. And there we go. And yeah, as noted in the staff report and the applicant's materials, this has gone through a couple of minor design revisions since you saw it in June as well. So, okay, so again, this is located at 1919 and 1949 Willamette Falls Drive. in the Willamette Falls Drive Historic Design District, so our commercial design district. And rebooting this didn't work. So if you could go to the next slide. Great. Yeah, it's class 2 design review. HRB makes a recommendation to the Planning Commission with the exception of the design exceptions, which are the purview of the HRB. Only the HRB has the authority to grant a design exception, which is why it's back before you tonight. The applicable code criteria can be found in Chapter 58 and Chapters 99 of the CDC. Next slide, please. So just to give you a little bit of a timeline and help the HRB understand what's happened since you last saw this. So back on June 13th, the HRB considered this project and ultimately recommended approval to the Planning Commission with the exception of one item. The HRB couldn't come to a final recommendation on this, on the what the applicant was calling a mezzanine level, and staff was calling it a third story, essentially. At that time, HRB made a recommendation of further consideration by the Planning Commission on that matter. So that recommendation was made because of vacations, and scheduling and whatnot over the summer. The Planning Commission didn't hear this until actually October 4th. So in between that time, between the June and October, the applicant actually made some minor revisions to the design to respond to some of the concerns raised at the HRB, like the rear window proportions were modified to more closely match the adjacent building next door and more closely align with the approval criteria. Also, too, the applicant removed the support posts from the canopy at the corner. There were some conditions related to that, and ultimately the applicant decided to remove that item and remove the complications therein. What they replaced that with was a design exception to construct a third story and come at it that way. So that design exception was made part of their application. They've made findings to that effect. I'll go over that a little bit later on in my presentation. So just before the October 4th hearing, a member of the public raised the question and basically stated that the HRB is the authority who can approve design exceptions. And upon further review by staff with the city attorney's office interpreted the code that said the HRB must make a decision on all design exceptions. So even because it was added subsequent to your hearing, the Planning Commission voted to remand it back here tonight to address the new design exception for a third story. The rest of the application, we believe your recommendation stands. It's this new design exception. So if you could, next slide, please. So in terms of tonight, additional materials provided for your review by the applicant include a summary of the process to date. I've also tried to include that in my staff report. The applicant provided a sequential series of building plans and elevations. And so those are just to help the HRB understand from a reference standpoint how this design has evolved. Revised elevations to include the elevator shaft and mechanical and storage space on the roof. That was a request by the Planning Commission in order to provide greater clarity on these things. And then also a new item is a building cross section to help the HRB understand the actual visual impact to people on the street and adjacent properties. So my staff report did include links to all the previous documents. Your staff report would have been 500 or 600 pages if I included everything. So I just tried to reference it by that, but the entirety of the record is there. So if there are questions, we can go over that. So next slide, please. So as a reminder, the project site is on Willamette Falls Drive. It's on the southeast corner of 12th and Willamette Falls Drive. It's between Willamette Falls Drive and Knapp's Alley on the back there. Next slide, please. Again, it's in the general commercial district and also within the Willamette Falls Drive commercial design district. The design district is represented. It's by kind of hard to see it there by a purple line there. So it is outside of the Willamette Historic District. So it backs up to R7 zoning across Knapp's Alley to the rear. So next slide, please. So again, just as a refresher, the proposal is the demolition of 2 existing buildings. It's the construction of a new 3-story commercial shell. There'd be alley and underground parking. And as it stands right now, 3 design exceptions are on on the docket. So the first 2 are not different from the previous design you saw. It's the use of fiber cement siding and trim and brick masonry in lieu of wood. The third is new, and again, it's a 3rd story for mechanical equipment, roof access, and storage. And I'll go over what that looks like in a minute. Next slide, please. So here are the criteria for a design exception. So basically, this is appropriate where the applicant either cannot meet the standards, or in this case, proposes an alternative to the standard. It says the Historic Review Board may grant a design exception where one of the following is met. And criterion A is basically if the applicant can demonstrate that upon the basis of historical records or historical photographs, that the alternative is appropriate for the 1880 to 1950 time period, essentially. Essentially, you're matching historic form. The second is that you're incorporating exceptional architecture common of the 1880 to 1915 time period, and overcompensates for an omission, or in this case, a deviation or the use of non-period materials. And again, the emphasis is upon superior design, detail, or workmanship. This standard probably has the most discretion for the HRB to consider in terms of what is superior design and detail and workmanship. So the first criterion A is really based upon evidence you can point to in the record from the past, and the second is upon exceptional design, and that's where you would have the most discretion. So next slide, please. So this is a quote from the applicant's application. I won't read it in its entirety, but the applicant has pointed to 5 other structures in the district as a precedent for their for the justification under criterion A. So basically, they pointed to 5 buildings that have covered rooftop spaces for roof access and storage. So I'll get to this later. A neighbor is challenging this finding, but that's something that I'll let the applicant speak to at their time period. So, and basically they are asserting that their design, that the applicant's design is similar in form to what's already in the design district. So, next slide, please. And then under criterion B, the applicant states that their proposed design will be unconditioned and unoccupied. It's essentially storage space, rooftop access, and HVAC equipment. So, and they're asserting the spaces will be fully hidden from view from the street, as mentioned in their cross section and elevations. But again, I'll let them speak to these standards. Next slide, please. One thing I also wanted to mention is that the code already has a design exception for projections not used for human habitation. And again, we don't believe this is really intended for things like storage space, but does account for things like elevator shafts, domes, chimneys, things like that. So just a reminder, things that are equipment or purely decorative, there's an exemption for this. So, next slide. So again, here's a revised elevation as seen from Willamette Falls Drive. Again, there's the prominent southwest corner of the building there on the right side of the elevation. Those are now it's now actually open space at the top. That's actually a clear story section for the second story. And so the windows at the corner are actually not there's no floor space behind that. But what you can see in back is the elevator shaft in the middle of the structure, sort of projecting up. And I think the other drawings give a sense of what that looks like and where that's located. Next slide, please. Again, here's the elevations from 12th Street. And again, The top floor, again, does not actually have windows. It's actually concealed back there by fiber cement. So next slide, please. And again, here's the elevation from Knapp's Alley and from the houses behind as well. You can see the projection in the middle of the structure, but it's actually set back from the edge somewhat, which is where I think the next slide actually comes in very handy. So I think this is the revised design for the third story. In the previous design, the floor space was concentrated on the right side, and now it's distributed. In the center of the structure, you have an elevator shaft closest to Willamette Falls Drive. You have conceptual mechanical equipment enclosure, followed by stairs on the top. And also there's some storage in there as well. And then on the right side, adjacent to 12th Street, you have a very large storage room proposed as well. And there on the corner, you have the sort of double height area for extra light and whatnot at the corner of the building, followed by a second at the very top of the floor plan. There's stairs going down as well for a secondary egress. And then also, as before, there's a rooftop deck above as well. So next slide, please. And then again, here are the proposed materials. Next slide. Next slide. And it looks like the cross section didn't make it into my into my slides. There in your application materials, there is a cross section that shows the views from the street. I apologize for this. I don't know how this didn't make it, how the slide didn't make it in there, but it was in there earlier today. So yeah, and I'll actually work with Lynn to pull that up in a minute. So, and then oh, this, yeah, if you could pull up the application. So I think the cross section is really applicable as well for the visual impact. So I think it's important.
Sheet it says section projections.
Yeah. Pull up the application or the staff report. You pull up the staff report for 11/17. I'm sorry, 11/14 today. I can find it. Okay, apologies for this technical issue. So yeah, so here's a cross section the applicant provided. This was at the suggestion of staff and the Planning Commission, I believe. But essentially, this helps the HRB and the public understand exactly what will be visible from the street. So the top one is emphasis on Willamette Falls Drive. And so again, and then down here below, it's just the way the top story is set back from the from Knapp's Alley helps minimize impacts to the neighbors to the south, the residential zone. So again, the third story, there's no avoiding seeing it from Willamette Falls Drive, but impacts to the residential zone are minimized in terms of that. So, but again, the lower spaces are unchanged from last time. Essentially, the underground parking, first and second story, are essentially the same, with the exception of the removal of the of the support posts and the change in the window design, which was a subject of deliberation at the HRB meeting. So, and I think we can return to this during questions, but if we can go back to the staff report, I'm sorry, to the PowerPoint. And so, again, there's a lot to track here, so I appreciate your patience and diligence. So, okay. So I think, as before, there's been substantial public comment on this. Ultimately, six parties testified on this application, and they kind of fall into about 3 different groups. Shannon Knight submitted a letter in support of the application. She suggested interpretations the HRB could adopt for this, and so she believed that the third story could be treated as as accessory structures on top of the building. I'm not sure that's really consistent with how we've interpreted the code before, but that was a suggestion put forth on that. But generally, she felt it was having additional commercial space in the area would add to the vitality of the district, and was generally in support. 4 other parties had generalized objections that did not address any specific code criteria, but were upon the basis of things like a general distaste for granting exceptions and for strict application of rules, concerns about impacts to traffic and parking, and then potential increase in noise and light from the exception being granted. And then the third category was by the Browns. And if you could move to the next slide, please. So Ian and Audra Brown submitted a letter earlier today as well, and that was provided in a memo this afternoon. And so their objection is based upon non-compliance with criterion A. They said they're generally in support of the application, but are not in support of a design exception based upon the findings provided. Their critique is that criterion A is not met because I believe 4 of the 5 exceptions, or 4 of the 5 precedent buildings cited, were constructed approximately 20 years ago. And so they felt that they were not a sufficient precedent to approve the application based upon criterion A. And that they also felt that the design exception requested under criterion A went beyond those precedents as well. There's also generalized concern about loss of view and sunlight, which is less relevant to the approval criteria. So, so again, that, these findings address criterion A. Criterion B still stands, though, and so that is based upon exceptional design and workmanship. So, so I think next slide, please. So I think since there's gonna be a lot of deliberation and questions, I'll keep this relatively straightforward. Just to help you out in your considerations, should you decide you needed additional time to consider testimony or request additional information, the next hearing date would be December 19th of the HRB. And so I just want to put that out there. I know last time HRB spent a lot of time deliberating, and if you need more information or time to think about what's being put in front of you, that's available. If you do make a recommendation one way or another, the next planning commission date is December 20th. That's more for the audience, but I just wanted to put that out there. And then finally, I think I'll just wrap up here and turn it back to you for questions, since you probably have a few. So thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you, John. Yeah. Anybody from the HRB have questions for the staff on the staff report?
Just for
Yes.
clarification, so you said you had public comment that were sent in. What was the total number of public comment you had on this one?
Oh, so
I
just,
lost track of the count.
okay. So just for tonight, there were 6 comment letters. And so, and 1 in support, 5 in general opposition. And then I put them in 3 categories. The first category was Shannon Knight in support. The next 4 I clustered as a sort of generalized opposition that were non-criteria specific. And then,
And the one.
1. So it was 6, but there was probably another 8 or 10 comment letters on the previous 2 meetings as well. And so it's a prominent location, so people are going to have thoughts and input on this. It's one of the busiest streets in town, and it's a prominent corner, so this is to be expected. So. So, the commercial design district limits structures to no more than 2 stories. And the request is to go beyond the 2-story limit. Correct. The 35-foot only comes into, I believe only the elevator shaft exceeds 35 feet, and that's exempted under that code criterion, under chapter 41, which is our height standards. Correct. That's the maximum height limit there. So the red dash.
John, I can't hear her.
Oh, sorry.
So there's a difference between 2 stories maximum
Correct.
and a height limit.
Correct.
And both are under the purview of the Historic Review Board, or only the 2-story one?
They are both actually.
Okay.
They're both.
Can-
Yeah.
Can you clarify that? Because it seems like height, bulk, and scale would be particularly part of planning commission.
Absolutely, yes. So that's a part of the design exception is, if we could go back a few slides to the approval criteria, I think it's about slide 4 or 5.
Because it seems we're quasi judicial, so for making us, so we're actually making something that the planning commission has to abide by. Is that how I'm hearing this?
Only on the design exception. Everything else is a recommendation, but the design exception is where you have
And they
authority.
wouldn't be able to change that.
So as I understand it.
Whoa.
So it's a quirkiness of our code that we'll probably clarify in the next update. It's a quirk, and it's something that was probably not intentional, but it was the way the language is crafted. So typically you would defer to the deciding authority, but the code specifies the HRB, and that was brought to our attention, and so we are working with that. But previously we were assuming it deferred to the deciding authority. So, but I think it's not. It's next slide, I think, Lynn. If we can move 1 slide over. One more slide over. Okay. That's okay. Yeah. If it helps, we have updates to our system on order. So
Can the people on
so-
WebEx tell me what they're seeing right now?
yeah.
So I can comment, Lynn, I can see the project timeline slide as well as the icons showing the council chambers, Tom, Scott, and myself, as well as a participant list.
Oh, there we go. Is this what the one you wanted?
Not that one. Not that one. Other direction. One more slide. 2 more slides. Right here, okay. So this is the design exception language. And the second sentence there, it says that the Historic Review Board may grant a design exception. And so that's the language. That's the reason why we're back here tonight on that. And so the standard itself is
58.090C number 3,
mhm,
which is building height limitations. Maximum building height shall be 35 feet as measured by this code
And
and
2
2
stories.
stories.
correct. Okay, so I think I think I got lost there in the technology. Were you waiting for an answer to a question, or were you just looking for any clarification? Yeah, anyone on the board or
Was clarification to the 2 stories or the.
correct. It's both. So
It's and, right?
it's
And.
and
Could we take a quick look at the slides and note all the incidences of over 35 feet on all 3 elevations?
yes, let's go through that slide. So,
Thank you.
and I think again, this also comes down to the standard also mentions a gable roof ridgeline, and so in this case, and this may be a question for the applicant as well. I think is, but yeah. So I think essentially, as this line is drawn here, there are a couple of small peaks of the false fronts, as shown here.
But projections can go above, so the finial above 1949 would be projection.
Acceptable, yes.
Correct.
But John, what you were saying though is it's not the height that's the exception that we're dealing with. It's the floors.
Correct. The exception, although, yeah, essentially at this point, the case in question is the third story.
It's the third
So,
story, right?
is the third story.
And John, just for clarification, are there any other third story buildings in Willamette right now?
There are.
There
So
are they historic? Are they 1880s to 1915 in age?
I haven't fully documented each one, and if that's information you want, we can certainly document that. So the applicant has presented information to that effect in their application. You know. But they're essentially small storage areas, though. They're essentially small storage areas. So
Okay. They're not full floors. They're just,
not to my understanding, but the applicant may be able to point to some in particular. But again, the standards also speak to historic precedent.
right.
So, but again, under criterion A, but criterion B, exceptional design. So it's, yeah,
But within that period of 1880 to 1915.
correct.
Right. We're not talking about modern buildings.
Yeah.
We're talking about the old building.
Yeah. And then in particular to the Westland area, which is.
John, on one of the slides,
Yes,
there was a deck, I believe, which would have been on essentially the roof of the
Correct.
second floor.
correct.
What's the purpose of that deck?
I think that's a good question for the applicant, but essentially it's for
Yeah, I
outdoor,
mean, if that's better.
it's for outdoor gathering. So I imagine
Upper gathering,
I,
eagles, food.
so a specific tenant isn't.
I mean, I can ask the applicant.
Yeah, exactly. I would say, I would imagine, so 2 restaurant spaces are tentatively proposed for the space, but
So,
again,
some sort of commercial application.
Correct,
And not
correct.
like the staff can go and sit in the summer up. It's commercial application.
correct,
Okay.
correct.
Thank
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I think to that point, you can see the furniture out there and whatnot. And so,
I'm sorry, I just wanted to get the idea, and the applicant is free to apply more information.
mhm,
If this was a commercial thing, which is what I got from the reading,
mhm.
and then just the way, I guess, something the way it was phrased, I thought, well, is this just like a break room? If the
Yeah,
weather's
no,
nice,
I
or-
that's a reasonable question, and no,
Okay.
I understand it's part of their commercial operation.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. So, and but how they decide to program it, that is not something that's really part of our purview. Yeah. So, so
Although but it's not storage. It's going to be used. It's not just storage space. Right?
so yeah, so I think there are a couple components here. I think you've got on the sort of on the right side of the screen here, in terms of this, you've got the storage room sort of up against 12th Street. You've got an outdoor deck in between, and then you've got an access point, sort of mechanical equipment area in the middle. And you can consider these as a single sort of exception. You can maybe break it down. It's kind of your call on this. And so, but I think in considering this, you may think about just facade impacts to the street form. And so, correct. That'd be something we could, yeah. Yeah, and enclosure and screening of mechanical equipment is pretty typical. So it's more so the storage areas. So, and use of the space could be conditioned as well. So in terms of use of the space could also be conditioned, such as, if there's concern about it becoming something other than storage. Yeah. So, but mhm. Mm. And so, do we address all the height questions, Commissioner Solberg? Okay.
Yes, thank you.
I just want to double check. Okay, thank you. Cool. Okay. Thank you.
Everybody's smiling. Hey, do I need to push this or can you hear me? Okay. My name is Scott Sutton. I'm with SG Architecture. We are the applicant and the architect for the project. You have, as you know, you've seen this before. We've walked through the rest of the project and gone through a few different exceptions, and we are down to this one item for the rooftop enclosed storage area. We let me reset here. Um, it's really a procedural issue. We started here, and there was a question of whether it could be a mezzanine or had to be described as a third floor. We were showing it as occupied at the time, and there was no consensus decision. And the decision here of this board was to kick the question to the Planning Commission. In the interim, as John mentioned, we wanted to address some concerns that were raised here. We change the use of the enclosed space on the rooftop from what was going to be kind of an enclosed conference area to now it's enclosed storage, but it is unoccupiable, uninhabitable space. There's no air conditioning, no insulation. It's purely shell. It's just designed to keep the rain off and the furniture and planter pots that are proposed for that outdoor deck space. So in the wintertime, when the weather, like now, when the weather starts to turn, those things can be brought in and stored. But it's basically a garage that is on top of the roof. We don't see that as a third floor, obviously, but other changes that we made along the way, we eliminated the windows at that level above the second floor level on 12th Street, with the exception of the windows at the southwest corner, northwest corner. Sorry, I get backwards on that. The 12th Street intersection, we eliminated all the windows except for that corner, but there is no floor behind those windows. There's no third floor behind those upper windows. Those upper windows shine down onto the second floor below. So it's just a tall space like you have in here. So if you imagine the windows that are up above you, that's essentially what these windows are on the corner are doing. The windows on the Knapp's Alley elevation, there was some concern from some of the neighbors that I can't recall the exact concern, but the gist of it was that we were asked to change those to match the ones on the adjacent 1969 building. So we did that. We emphasized what you were just discussing a minute ago. We emphasized the heavy dashed red line showing the 35-foot maximum height elevation. And that is a distinction that there's maximum height and there's maximum number of floors. Maximum number of floors is 2. Maximum height is 35 feet. And we don't need to get into all of the technicalities of how that 35-foot height is described or in the code, because in fact, virtually all of our parapet, with a few sliver exceptions, all of our walls fall under that 35-foot line. So we don't exceed the maximum. We're within the code, in black letter within the code. The canopy support columns that the city engineers were concerned about, with the beautiful new sidewalks and walkways and all the utilities that went into that, they were concerned that the footings for those columns would become problematic for the utilities in particular. So we, rather than try to walk that tightrope, we just said, we'll take the columns out. It makes travel, pedestrian travel through there easier. It's a cleaner solution. And we provided tie rods back to the building that match the ones that are over on the 1969 building. So we have some nice consistency across the entire block. As I say, the issue of the third floor, not third floor, now storage, was procedural. We were on our way to planning commission. We had made these couple of adjustments, trying to be, as good a neighbor as we can be. And staff came to us and said, we really think that the question of the third floor should be done as a design exception. We hadn't planned to do it as a design exception. We didn't do that when we came before you originally. We don't think it is a third floor, so we weren't proposing an exception. But staff said, well, we think it's a question, so make it an exception, go before the planning commission as an exception. Planning commission, when we got to the planning commission hearing, we were not able to have a hearing because the question was raised about who has jurisdiction over design exceptions. Well, in our opinion, it shouldn't have been an exception to begin with, but now we're back here. So So we've been kicked back here, and we have kind of another round of basically the same comments that you saw before from the neighbors and the local citizens. One in favor, a few that are opposed on traffic and parking grounds, things that have already been covered. Traffic report was satisfactory that we're providing parking that we don't have to as part of our application, which should actually help conditions out on the street. And then one extended, very detailed letter that for all the effort, I don't think is as applicable as maybe it would seem on its face. So we so what we're asking for in our exception, now that it's an exception, we don't believe this is a third floor. We think that unoccupiable space, even though it's covered, we feel it fits more in the realm of accessory spaces, or like the mechanical screen that is required by Chapter 55, those sorts of spaces. In fact, the mechanical units are screened per Chapter 55. The deck is by definition not a third floor because there's no roof, and there's no conditioning, there's no walls. It's outright allowed, which I'm working my way over to just the storage area. And the storage area we believe is not a third floor. Again, not occupiable, not conditioned. It's basically just a way to keep the rain off. In the district, there are 5 buildings out of 24 along Willamette Falls Drive that have these rooftop spaces, and that have been allowed. That's 20% of the buildings along Willamette Falls Drive have these rooftop spaces. There are actually 7 spaces on 5 buildings. 5 of them are storage spaces, and 2 appear to be actually habitable. They look like they're apartments. You can see them from Willamette Falls Drive. From, if you're at the right angles, you can see that they exist up there. They're not obtrusive, but you can see them. In our case, we have walls that conceal all of those spaces. They're not visible. The rooftop deck is not visible. The only part of this that is visible in any way from any location is the elevator shaft. And as John mentioned, that is specifically exempted from the height requirements by Chapter 41. And we're doing our best to minimize that. It's really just a condition of elevator manufacturers require a certain amount of height above the floor level that you have to have above for maintenance. So we are, anyway, so we covered mechanical screening, the deck, storage, and I think the most important drawing in the application was the last one that you saw with the section view. I don't know if we can put that back up again, but the sections through the building that show viewpoints from people, how they would be able to see the building from across Willamette Falls Drive, from across 12th Street, and from across Knapp's Alley at both the first and second floor levels. And in all cases, the only thing that's visible based on those view angles is the elevator shaft, the top of the elevator shaft. So we feel that with rooftop spaces on 20% of the existing buildings, that's a precedent. And while it is not a precedent of the 1880 to 1950 era, it is nonetheless a precedent of over the decades of development on Willamette Falls Drive, that in itself creates a historical record, which is the crux of the exception standard. And just by virtue of the fact that the city has approved these types of spaces over the decades, to us, that indicates that the city feels that these types of spaces are in fact appropriate to the architecture in the area, which is the other crux of the exemption. So we hope that you see it, that you're able to see it in the same way. We feel that we're utterly unobtrusive to any view from the street or from the neighbors, and that our usage is very consistent with other buildings on the street and with the needs of a typical modern commercial building. So we're providing what a modern commercial building needs without violating the spirit of the historic look to the outside of the shell. So with that, if anybody has any questions.
I just want to interject that when answering any questions, if you could speak up, the audience can't hear you.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
No audio.
Saying that this no, now we're not going to see some.
Well, I actually addressed that in my notes to staff in our application. It would be a requirement in order to make that livable, it would be a requirement to get a building permit, and at which time it would also be a change of use from storage to whatever habitable occupation or occupancy it would be. That would drive it back through design review, which would bring it back here and bring it back to planning commission. And Icon, you see their buildings everywhere. You know who they are. They occupy the 1969 building. They want to do right by the neighborhood. They're not going to jeopardize their standing in the neighborhood and with the city by doing something silly like, letting somebody have an apartment up there without a permit. So
just to clarify, you feel this is an accessory structure, just like
I feel it serves as an accessory structure because it's storage. It's just accessory to the needs of the building. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I have a question for you. You told us there's no windows though, but all the drawings look as though there's windows on that third floor. Are those just architectural?
Not third floor, but roof level. But along 12th Street, we don't have windows. We have panels with wood trim that mimics the mullions of windows.
So they're not real windows, but they're
just solid. They're
fake solid windows to look like a window, like it's a real third story.
To mimic a window, yes. Except at the 12th Street corner, as I mentioned, that there's a bank of 3 windows on each side of the 12th Street corner that.
Okay, I'm confused. So there are windows then?
Well, just as I said in my presentation, at the corner, there are windows. At the storage, there are no windows.
Okay, so on that section that is the top of the building that you're calling an enclosed rooftop space,
Mm-hmm.
there are windows in that space?
No, that's what I'm saying is there are not.
So then what are those windows that are on the corner that are on the third floor, on
Windows on
the
corner,
third story of glass?
they're like these here. They shine down to the second floor. There's no floor in that area.
Okay, but they're on the third level of the glass, where the glass enclosure is. So
Yep.
it gives the indication from the street that there's a third floor up there from someone walking by.
I think I have it on the screen. I know.
Yeah, so I'm looking right
okay,
at it.
yeah,
There's-
right
there's
here.
Glass there. It's a third floor. There's glass there from the
Okay.
Uh,
I'm not sure.
I don't know, I'm not-
Well, okay. I would concede that there is glass up there that shines down to the second floor. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Is there a
I'm just trying to get clarification of what it's going to look like
Okay.
from the street, because it's going to look like there are people walking by that there's a third floor there because there's glass up there.
But I don't think there's anything in part of the code that says that that's not allowed.
Well, it says in the code that there's no third floor allowed.
Yes, and there's no third floor.
I mean, it's pretty straightforward on that one.
But there's no third floor. So, I mean,
Now, on the other buildings that you showed on the proof, most of those are modern additions, so they don't date within the area, and those few that are, those are all on dormers. So I know in the architectural, I'm not an architecture person or a real estate person, but typically if a room is inside of a dormer, it is not considered a room, it's considered a half a story. If there's anyone on here who's real estate, they can tell me that. So those would be considered half stories that you're showing for evidence. I'm not showing any, I don't see any other evidence of an actual third floor in Willamette.
well, in chapter 58, there's no allowance for a half story either. It's 2 stories, period.
True, and so some of those
So
have been exceptions or it's not going
all
to.
those half stories would
Yeah.
have been exceptions.
And some of those were built before we existed as a board.
Well, I don't know about that. I don't know the history of the board or all of those specific buildings. I agree with you that they are not necessarily from the 1880 to 1915. But as I said before, precedent isn't necessarily tied to a specific date range.
Well, actually, in this
Precedent is
code, it
precedent.
does. It says in there that our code, in order for us to be able to prove it as an exception, it has to date within that range, 1880 to 1915. Unless we can come up with an exceptional design reason to go beyond that range, that's one of the rules that we have to have.
Our reason for asking for the exception is that 20% of the buildings on Willamette Falls Drive have received a similar exception. So we believe we should be entitled to one as well.
Has Icon built any other buildings in the neighborhood?
I'm sorry.
Has Icon built any other buildings in the neighborhood?
Oh, yeah.
Are there any other Icon buildings that were given exceptions to have third story?
Yep.
There were?
Yeah.
And when were those exceptions given, you know, and by the board?
I do not know the date.
That's not a third floor on the outside. That's not a third floor, that's an extra.
Well, I mean, this is really kind of the crux of the question too, is that we're saying that we don't have a third floor either. Now, if you all decide that there is a third floor, then we do need to go through this exercise of deciding the exception. If by a group you can decide that there is not a third floor, then this is all moot and, we can all go home. So
I guess my question to you would be, you're calling the storage that's an S1 occupancy, it's an occupiable space, right?
well, it's not habitable. I mean, yes,
It
you
still
can,
has an
you can
occupancy,
walk
though?
into it to put down a table and chair and then walk back out.
Yeah.
So I guess
But it has
in
an
a sense,
occupancy.
it's occupiable, but it's not habitable.
Right.
It's not usable in the sense of, in the sense that the code generally looks at. But
I don't even think my thing's working, but the code, it is, S1 storage is an occupiable space per code.
yes.
Just to follow up a little bit on the precedents that you cited, and you're not disputing that the precedents are not contemporary with the 1800s and yeah.
No,
Okay.
not disputing that at all.
Uh, do any of them have a commercial use on the top, on the roof?
There are two that I believe are actually occupied as, and they appear to be occupied either as, well, I can't say. I could imagine either apartments, conference rooms. I don't know exactly, but they have doors and windows that appear to be occupied. The remainder are more like what we're proposing, just room for building storage. And so I think we're right in line with what the rest of them are.
Okay, but you do have a use on the roof that's not like the other building.
The rooftop deck, you mean?
Yeah.
That's
No.
true.
Okay.
But yes, that's true.
So-
And
So it's,
that is technically, you're right, it is technically a commercial use because it will be used by the tenants and tenant guests. We don't know, as far as we know at the moment, there's no sort of retail or restaurant use up there. We're not proposing like food service or a bar service up there, which would be awesome, but no.
Yeah.
No, it's a space where you could have meetings, you could go to relax, you could go up on your lunch hour. Tenants could, take guests up there, but no, it's not. I wouldn't have called it commercial, but I suppose it technically
Okay.
is. Yeah.
and also the ones that you used as Preston, and maybe Denny can answer this better than you can, were those approved under the same set of rules that we have now with the?
My assumption would be that the rules have changed over time. And
Which they would, yeah.
I say that because the rules have changed since the 1969 building, and I believe we had something to do with those rules. So, but
Well, I was
that-
thinking
that's
more
a- I mean, the
specifically
code-
about an HRB review process. So on.
Well, the code changes from, obviously
Oh,
changes
yeah,
from
a
time
code-
to time.
yeah.
And we wouldn't dispute that. And just as we don't dispute that, as far as I know, all of those are more modern than
Yeah.
1915. I have no idea. But it's not really what we're just saying that clearly the city over time has again and again made the decision that that type of space is acceptable and in the zone. And one of the criteria is that it's architecture that is appropriate to the architecture in the region, and it's a historical record. And a historical record is precedent. Appropriate to the architecture is that, it's been allowed. If it had always been shot down, then it would make sense to shoot it down. If it's always been allowed, then it makes sense to allow it.
Yeah.
So.
Again, I can defer to Denny if he's willing to answer a question about I was thinking more along the lines of an HRB process for those. I mean, if they go back 20, 30 years.
That predates me. Yeah, I wasn't on the board then. I've only on the board for 7 years now. So I know it predates me on that decision. And that's one of the dangers of making a decision like that. We set a precedence, and then it goes forward from this point forward that everybody else can use that decision. So I don't know. And some of these may have been snuck in between, as you said, between code. John would probably know that better than I would have. We'd have to go back to look at the archive and see what was approved and what was said.
To me, the precedent is a situation where, oh, this is just like this. You let that happen, so let us happen. But if the precedent is kind of sort of like what we want to do, I'm less compelled to consider it a precedent, put it that way.
Could I ask what about our storage area you feel is not like what, like the others? I mean, other
I
than
would
the,
believe storage on the roof, some of the other areas is, my concern's not about your storage.
okay,
What you're calling storage. My concern is the other use on the roof
the rooftop deck.
of the roof of the second floor, I guess it would be.
So we're talking about the deck?
Yeah, we're talking about the deck.
Okay, because as I understand it from staff, as well as from reading the code, the deck is actually something that it's not prohibited, it's not mentioned, it's allowed because it's not a story. By definition, by chapter 2
Okay,
definition, it's not a story.
I
so.
personally do not want to hear any more discussion about what is a story or what isn't a story. I think we all have been through that long enough. And
Okay.
I'm willing to see, I wouldn't call that a third story per se,
Mhm.
but its use is more relevant to me than, oh, it has to have a roof and XYZ specifications. Thank you. Thank you.
I've noticed that many parts of the elevation exceeding 35 feet are just barely exceeding 35 feet. And
Yeah, and
I'm just wondering if there's a really strong motivation for going above the height limit. I mean, it's a historic district of fairly diminutive buildings. And yes, many of them get close to 35 feet, but they're sort of peaked or fault and have plenty of daylight. And this is a building with, pretty solid massing that's
Yeah.
pretty well filling out that area. So I was wondering if you could tell me about the motivation for exceeding that limit, sometimes what looks like by just 12 inches in some cases.
yeah, I think for the most part, it's 12 or less inches and it's on like the corner of cornices. And if it really is, that's certainly something that we can look at trying to inch it down, get it below the 35-foot line. Technically, and this is the part I said where I didn't want to, I wasn't going to bore you with the ins and outs of how the 35-foot height is described in the code. But here we go. Basically, the chapter 58 code says that from the eave line to the sure I get this right. And I won't get it right here because I have to have it in front of me. But essentially, there's a halfway point between the top of the roof and the eave line, and that the top of the cornice line, the true, the ultimate top of the wall, can actually be above that 35-foot line in those cases. That said, we don't have a problem with dropping this down. If that's an issue, if those little bits are an issue, fine. We'll deal with. We'll be happy to take care of that.
I think our CDC doesn't have that sort of negotiation that is seen often in code or zoning where there's sort of like an average of those distances. I get the impression, my interpretation is 35-foot maximum, total building.
Yeah, and I could show you the diagram in the code. I don't have it with me, but there is actually a diagram in the code that explains how that the top of the wall could actually be higher than 35 feet. But as I say, we're talking a matter of inches, so by all means, we're happy to bring it down.
I think there's a good diagram on page 41 of 48.
And is that in our CDC or in the
That's
handout?
a muni code.
I can pull that up in 1 second.
Hmm? Oh. Well, you know, if you get an invite from one of the tenants, you know, you'll get to see it. Yeah.
Okay, see, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll go into public testimony. As I mentioned at the beginning of this meeting, if you wish to testify during this hearing, please complete a sign-in testimony form and submit it to the staff now. You'll have up to 3 minutes to speak. If you have any written materials or other evidence you would like us to see, please hand it to the staff. The staff will distribute it to members of the board and the applicant, as well as place it in the record. With that, the first speaker is Ian Brown.
Can you hear me? All right. Thank you, members of the board. Good to see you again. Speaking for my wife and myself, we don't oppose a two-story commercial building allowed by the CDC. The zoning code is how we balance each other's interests in this kind of a situation. And the rules we're dealing with have been in effect for a long time. My wife and I looked into the zoning when we moved in, bought our home, and the applicant was aware of the zoning when it was planning its construction. If the current proposal matched the neighboring building, it would affect us, but we wouldn't be objecting here tonight. First thing I want to note is that many more than five people have objected, either in person or in writing, throughout this process based on the height of the structure. And the dismissal of some of the other comments as just relating to parking or traffic really don't accurately describe those comments. You know, certainly some comments have mentioned parking and traffic, but they've also mentioned the height of the building. And there's been a lot of concern from the beginning of this process from the public regarding the proposed third story, which is what is at issue tonight. I encourage you to read those comments and evaluate them for yourselves. The visual stature of the building is relevant in all aspects. Its effect on the neighbors is relevant in all aspects. It's a height limitation. It's a limitation in the code on the height of the building. One comment that the applicant has made is that there's no third story under the part of the upper facade that has the windows, the third level of windows. And I suppose the suggestion is that part of the structure is not a third story structure, but the rest of the part that has a third floor is a third story. And this section with the windows, it magnifies the effect of the third story. And that's one distinction between this application and every other, the other buildings that have some partial third stories, as noted in our written submissions. In those cases, the third stories are minimized by Western false fronts. In this case, the applicant has maximized the appearance of a third story with these windows. And the applicant is still saying that this isn't a third story, that And so that the applicant really is not addressing the standard for requesting an exception to allow a third story. On the merits of the request, none of the cited buildings are similar. 4 of those buildings aren't old. 3 don't have any third story interior space. 1 was given an exception. That one actually started its application process before the current zoning went into effect. I don't know if that historic review board would have granted the same exception today, but that exception is not similar to the one that is currently being requested. Our submission does answer some of the historical questions that were asked earlier. And the applicant's citation to these other buildings show the importance of strict enforcement of design standards, especially when they are specific and objective. Even the appearance of a deviation can set an unintended precedent. Here, the applicant is citing HVAC housing as precedent for a third story. It's citing half stories that are completely hidden, tucked behind false fronts and gable roofs as precedent for a 25 by 100-foot box of a third story set prominently on the edge of 3 of the 4 walls of the building. It's citing 21st century buildings as representative samples of 1880 to 1915 architecture. The applicant is asking to do something that is not just forbidden by the code, but is a radical departure from the existing character of the neighborhood. If you grant this request, which is such a leap from existing buildings, how much of a leap do you think would be requested from this one? The applicant's exception request describes the third story structures as 2 rooftop spaces. The applicant says these spaces are not visible from Willamette Falls, 12th Street, or Knapp's Alley, nor even from the second stories across Knapp's Alley. For the west section of the third story, the applicant's illustrations show that this is not true. For the center section, it's also not true, at least from the second stories across Knapp's Alley. This is a little harder to get across on paper. The illustration sightlines don't reflect our sightlines. Our house is behind the 1969 building, which is basically a 2-story version of the applicant's proposal. I took some pictures from our bedroom, and they're on page 7 of our application. I'm a couple feet higher than the second-story resident depicted in the illustration because of the slope, the grade. So the angle looking over Knapp's Alley is shallower. The real-world angles and sightlines will give the neighboring houses a much better view of whatever is above that second story. If you look at my top picture on page 7 of our submission, you can see the white back side of the parapet over 11th Street. The bottom picture, my angle is actually, you can't tell in this picture, but my angle is shallow enough that I can, yes.
Stop you here. It's 5 now.
Okay. The angle is actually shallow enough that there's a little opening at the top of the gutter, at the top of the downspout. I can actually look through that opening from my bedroom and see the back of the parapet that fronts Willamette Falls Drive. I can even see a rooftop HVAC unit from our bedroom. I didn't get a good picture of that because of our tree. I can get a better picture of that in a month. But the point is that we have a much better view of the third story structure. We bought our home next to a commercial lot that has a 2-story height limitation. And the developer bought a lot that has a 2-story height limitation. These rules exist for a variety of reasons. They tell owners what they can do, and they tell neighbors what can happen nearby. I ask that the Historic Review Board uphold the 2-story restriction and deny the exception request. Thank you. And does anybody have any questions? Thank you.
Can you hear me? Thank you so much for your service on the Historic Review Board. We appreciate your time and advocacy for our neighborhood community. To summarize, the developer is asking to add 2,400 square feet of covered roof space to the top of a 2-story building. That's like adding our 4-bedroom, 3-bath home to the top of the building and saying it isn't a significant addition. That's a home-sized amount of additional income earning square footage, whether you call it storage or not. It's not exceptional architecture or superior design. It's just bigger. The existing commercial building on the same block was built by the same developer about 5 years ago. They were able to build it without a 3rd story. This preserved some of the sunlight and quality of life for the residential neighbors that border this building, including us. Homeowners have many building codes to follow within the historic district because preserving the character of the neighborhood is important to our community. We're simply asking developers in this commercial district to follow the rules, just like we do. If we let this exemption slide, we open the door for every building in Willamette rising higher and higher, overshadowing the balance of residential and commercial needs. Many neighbors have submitted written testimony over the last few months, not just for this meeting. They've attempted to attend the many meetings and voice their concerns about this development proposal. In contrast, you have, I believe, 2 parties on record in favor. Please listen to the majority of voices that have spoken on this matter. We do not object to a building at this site if it meets the code requirements. As currently submitted, it clearly does not. Thank you.
Hallecky. Kathy Hallecky, President of the Willamette Neighborhood Association. The Willamette Neighborhood Association has heard multiple concerns on this project on multiple occasions, and the concerns tend to be the height issue, livability for the residents on Naps, noise from both the restaurants on the third floor, 2nd floor, and the mechanical, because mechanical themselves can make a lot of noise. Lighting from the top level and perhaps from the 2nd story, shining into the residents' homes on the other side of Knapp's Alley. Concerns have increased. I would say we hear probably 3 or 4 on a monthly basis at our meetings, and it's not the same people coming each time. They're different. And this concerns have increased since this project was brought before the Willamette Neighborhood Association. Anybody have any questions? Thank you.
Can you hear me? So my name is Yarrow Curry, and I'm here tonight speaking on behalf of myself and my family. We live a block away from the proposed Icon project, and I ask you to not approve the exemption tonight. We are opposed to the 3rd story in any rooftop deck area as it backs to residential area, neighborhood primary school, and we will create noise issues, block natural light, and will really blur the lines between residential areas and public spaces. Our small town deserves to keep its historic feel and making this exception will allow for building opportunities that we do not want. Thank you.
I want to step in here, and Chair Manning, can you make sure when you're speaking that your red light is on? Thank you.
Turning this on and off all night. The next is Al Soseki, okay.
Exactly my feeling. I like to stand. Is that okay? No, I just want to reiterate whatever. My name's Al or Albert Secchi. I live at 1926th Avenue. That's directly behind the building on the corner across the street from there, across from Knapp's Alley. And my daughter's room is right at the second story level. I have a picture of it where the building is going to be. It's going to be almost level with where that third story is going to be, a little bit underneath there. It's going to be, she keeps that window open during most of the summer times and warm weather. And I'm just concerned about the noise that could be up there if it's used for any type of commercial purpose on the deck of that building. So what I encourage everybody to do is to hold to the code. Make sure it stays within the 35-foot limit and not allow any type of extension above the second story that the current building is at. Anything above that would really infringe on the livability of the houses behind it. And I have a picture of the view from her window right there, and you can tell from that picture that it would be directly across from her. So having a building is one thing, but having some type of possible noise or any lighting or anything of that would be intrusive is something that we're concerned about. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you. All right, the next is James Estes. Some of these aren't my fault because you guys have really bad handwriting. So, yeah.
James Estes. I live at 1992 6th Avenue, West Linn, which is right across Knapp's Alley from the development of the project. I concur with Ian and Audra's comments. Both are written in their written submission. So, start with, I support development of commercial two-story building on the 1919 and 1949 Willamette Drive, but I wholeheartedly oppose the applicant's third story. So the Historic Review Board is allowed to, in their review, is allowed to look at design exceptions under very, limited in certain circumstances, but the applicants could meet the standards without an exception by removing the third story. And the criteria that are not met as the precedent buildings cited by the applicant are not historical buildings, and have not, the other precedent buildings have lower visual profile, I think, than what's being proposed here. Though allowed by the code, the elevator shaft that's protruding above the height requirement is actually in order to service that third floor. And so I think that I would argue that, failure to look at the historical period, I think, does not set good practice. And I would ask that the Historic Review Board deny the exception for a third floor. Thank you. Any questions?
One question for you. You said that the elevator shaft is to service the third floor. Do you know where that's from? I don't know. That wasn't mentioned in the application.
Yeah, the height of it looks as if it's not just to service the first two floors, but actually to service the third. So, because it's extending quite a bit, we can ask the applicant if that's the case, but I don't think it would protrude above the height limit if it was just servicing the first two floors. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so we have rebuttal by the applicant.
Well, thank you to all the neighbors. I do appreciate their comments. They've clearly been paying close attention, and I know any building going up near your home will affect your quality of life. Absolutely understand that, acknowledge it, but nonetheless, Someone mentioned the storage being 2,400 square feet. In fact, it's half that. It's 1,200 square feet. Light and noise. Someone mentioned concern about light and noise. There's no more noise from inside the building than from inside of anybody else's building. If they're referring to noise they weren't specific, but if they're referring to noise from the rooftop deck or light from the rooftop deck, that is certainly covered by the municipal code. And there are regulations for time of day and amounts of noise and light, and those would have to be met. Or they could, or whoever is causing the problem can be cited. So those laws are already on the books. Most of the concern seems to be really about the height. And I'd just like to reiterate, as we discussed earlier, the entire building, with the exceptions that we're going to address, the few inches here and there, is below the 35-foot height limit. It's not simply a 2-story limit, it's a 35-foot height limit. We could have 2 stories where the ceiling / roof of the second story was at 35 feet. So it's both of those are part of the code. And I'd like to mention that eliminating the storage, if the storage has to go away, that doesn't change the shell of the building. Those walls will still be at the height that they're at. So if height is a concern, that doesn't really change. So which gets really to the crux of the whole question. Mechanical space. Somebody mentioned mechanical space, that it would be noisy. Well, that's why we're screening it. That's why we're putting a roof cover over it, because that will help mitigate most of the noise. That's to our benefit too. That will be more pleasant for people using the rooftop deck by having that mechanical space screened. The rooftop deck is allowed, as we've covered. And that gets us to really focusing on what the issue is here tonight, which is the storage area. And that really is the question for you: is rooftop storage allowed, as it's been allowed on 20% of the buildings up and down Willamette Falls Drive, or not? We don't consider it to be a 3rd floor because the space will not be, while it is technically by the IBC standard of S1 storage, it would be an occupied space, but by the standard of the fact that there's no insulation, no heating and air conditioning, no lighting beyond what we call stumble lighting, which is just enough to keep you from, it's enough to be able to see in the dark. It's a storage area. It's not, nobody's going to be camping out in there. Nobody's going to be serving drinks out of there. It's a place to put tables and chairs from the deck when it's off season. So it's the storage. We meet everything else meets the criteria of the code. It may not be popular if you have a house on the other side of Knapp's Alley and you've become accustomed to watching the sun rise or set over Willamette Falls Drive, but it is allowed in the commercial district. It is something that we feel is necessary for this building, and it's part of our application that meets the code. And so we would appreciate your consideration, and we look forward to your approval. Any questions?
One of the folks brought up the elevator shaft. Is that going to access to the 3rd floor?
Yes.
The elevator will open on the 3rd floor?
Yes. There's no reason not to.
Well, except for it's not a 3rd floor. I don't have an elevator on my roof.
You could. I mean, it's not.
I mean, I think you need to justify at this point that it is a 3rd floor. If you're going to have an elevator opening onto the floor, it's a floor.
You have stairs up there up to the 3rd floor too.
That's an egress for fire. Elevators cannot be used for fire egress.
No, but it can certainly be used for access to a rooftop deck that's allowed. It can also be used to carry items up for roof maintenance.
So that roof, that if that was accessing the second floor, that external area for that access would not need to be that tall. That's only that tall because of the elevator access on the third floor.
I'm not following.
That service area for the elevator is that height because it must be able to access that rooftop area.
Yes,
Okay.
because top of the inside clearance for the elevator has to be 12 feet above the landing for the elevator. And that's just a requirement of the elevator manufacturers and the equipment requirements.
Okay, that wasn't clear in the application that there was an elevator access to that floor. I don't know if John, if you know that or not, but it wasn't really clear.
It's it's on the roof plan. It calls out an elevator.
So you mentioned other uses for that elevator?
Well, I
mechanical
mean,
things, or-
whatever you can use an elevator for, yeah. It's, I don't have specific uses for it, but I would imagine access to the rooftop deck. I would imagine bringing up maintenance tools and equipment to work on the HVAC units. I would imagine that there might be things that, I don't know. Beyond that, I'm not sure.
Okay.
Would you foresee things like catering and stuff being brought up?
Catering?
Catering, because you were talking about events on the patio up there and stuff, so.
I
like
don't,
catering.
honestly don't know. I mean, I suppose you could have, there would not be a restaurant.
Right, no, but
service.
I've been to many places that were catered, yeah. and they're
Yeah,
really
I would suppose if you had, say, one of the tenants, my presumption is that the second floor will all be office tenants, as it is in the 1969 building. I could easily see a company wanting to have an outdoor meeting or presentation on the deck, and they might bring up food trays.
So when the law offices of Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe decide to have a party, they can.
As long as
Well, they could go up, use the.
as long as they keep the volume down, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
But it could also be used for ADA reasons for somebody that worked on that second floor that wanted to go and enjoy the sunshine for
Yes.
their lunch hour, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And in fact, because we are providing a usable public space up there, that's also the reason to have the elevator access that point. That would be the ADA access.
Anybody else have any more questions for him?
Back to the, I mean, I don't want to stick on the elevator, but are there examples of other historic buildings in town that have an elevator access onto the third floor?
Honestly, I have no idea.
Okay, I just wanted to see. I don't know of any, but.
I suspect if there are historic buildings with third floors that were built recently enough to have elevators, that the elevator would go to the third floor. But but again, we don't see this as a third floor. So.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Addressing requests for continuances. Do we have anybody that wants to continue this, or do we want to move to questions of staff?
I have a maybe it's directed at staff.
Come
on. Are we, John can probably answer this. Are we potentially under any limitations in terms of, what is it, the 180-day rule?
No, so is your question related to a continuance?
Yeah, if we're continuing, are we gonna start bumping up against?
We could do a continuance, but because of another hearing is required by the planning commission and the council, there is a very, very tight timeline. I think you might request, if you think you need more time to consider the application and potentially approve it, you may ask the applicant for a 30-day extension just to cover that. But yes, there is, I think the 120-day expires in January.
Okay.
And
I'm
so,
sorry,
or
120.
February,
I
I'm sorry,
said
February.
180, 120.
Yeah, so let me confirm that for you.
Because I was gonna say, this is their first step.
Yeah. Yeah, this is sort of like a revisit, but it's sort of we got in this
But they're
weird,
still on step A.
yeah, so basically I would encourage you to request an extension from the applicant if you go that route.
Okay.
So, okay.
then-
And I have some follow-up thoughts to some of what I've heard as well. If now's an appropriate time where I can come back at a good time.
Yeah, I would encourage us to do that. I don't know if like you can handle it and then just bring it. Well, actually, you said January is,
The 120-day clock expires February 10th. And
I'm
so,
sorry, you say February 10th?
correct. So
Oh, okay.
we still have to get through planning commission and
Oh,
then,
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
That's what I'm thinking. It still goes, and it's now into the holidays.
correct,
And
correct.
I can see reasons that February 10th is not near as far away as
It's very
it
close.
sounds right
It's
now,
very close.
having been on planning commission for 8 years.
Correct.
Okay, yeah, I guess I don't remember all the procedure, just ask you or follow up
And so
request.
I think that would be I think you would have to make a motion. And so that would be
Oh, okay.
yeah.
Follow
So,
motion.
and this is maybe where the city attorney may want to weigh in procedurally in terms of how we do this.
I can certainly do that. So if there is the need for a continuance that the HRB wants to establish a continuation date, the recommendation would be to ask the applicant to extend the 120-day clock and would require that in writing. But procedurally, it would be best to get it on the record tonight, followed up with a written communication to the staff, hopefully within a day or so.
Okay, does that necessitate a motion to contact the applicant requesting a continuation, an extension?
Well, what you have the applicant present, so I would suggest
Yeah.
that you invite the applicant to come forward and discuss whether or not they would be willing to do that. If you are anticipating the potential of a continuance, yes.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Chairman, do you want to ask if the, I think we should ask them the question if they would be willing to grant it because they still have a ways to go.
Actually, with all respect, I don't think we do have a long ways to go. We're down to one question. And we're certainly willing to discuss the idea of a continuance or an extension if that's necessary, but we were thinking that, we were thinking that you guys would be able to deliberate and come to a decision either way, and then proceed to planning. So, so I would reserve answering on the question of an extension or continuance until we understand better what that would be, what the reason would be for.
The issue is though, is I'm gonna gavel this hearing closed and then we're gonna deliberate.
Yep.
And then make a decision, right? So at the end of that, if you get the decision you want, that's one scenario. If you
Well-
get the decision you don't want,
Well,
then it
can
starts
I-
over again.
Well,
right?
can I raise a procedural question? My experience in the past, not just here, but has been that public hearing will close. You guys will go into deliberation. If it looks like you're stuck on a point or something that, you'd want us to go back or we would want to go back and review, that the hearing can be opened briefly again in order to ask the question about the continuance or extension. Is that accurate? Okay. So that's what I'm used to. So maybe that's where this is coming from. We're used to the other way. So if you get stuck, yeah. Or if there's a reason for us to chime in and say. So, thank you.
Well, okay, let me ask John another question then. Okay, maybe I'm operating under, I wasn't thinking they would be here in front of us until February 10th. But we're not making a final decision on the.
So you are not making the, well, this is,
say
this is,
that
this
they
is,
still have, my understanding, and maybe I'm wrong.
yes,
Whatever we decide here, we're deciding a very narrow issue.
you are
And then it goes back up to the planning commission, correct?
correct. And so because of a quirk of the code, so our assumption in the past was that you're making a recommendation to planning commission on all items. And now revisiting the code, you have final authority on one item.
Real
And
specific item.
correct, and the HRB in June gave a recommendation on the other standards. So it's a weird thing. So yeah, so
Right.
yeah, so it's a final response by final decision by planning commission and potentially council needs to be rendered within those
Within
120.
the 100, yeah,
Correct.
that's what I'm thinking. It's not, they're not going to be sitting here come February. They still have quite a process.
Correct.
And like I said, it's Christmas time.
Correct.
And
Well,
they have to go all the way through planning commission and potentially an appeal to the council. And,
correct, which is why we have December 20th reserved
right.
for this item.
And yeah, I guess that, and that was my question, just are they open to that possibility? I certainly hope we're not keeping you here
Yeah.
till Christmas. I
Yeah.
think you'll be out of our purview
Yeah.
fairly quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Because yeah. So anyway, that was just and I think as the attorney said, it might be nice to have it on the record here.
Yes.
So when it goes up to planning commission, if something happens or whatever, okay, it's already been on the record.
Correct. Yeah.
at
Yeah. The
least
record continues.
Right. That they
Yeah.
would be open to it.
Mm-hmm.
Because as I said, 8 years on the planning commission,
Mm-hmm.
stuff happens.
Oh, yes. Yes. Yeah.
So,
Such as the last planning commission hearing. So
yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
Right.
So, yeah.
So I guess I was thinking it was more of a yes, no question of the applicant.
Okay.
If it's not required, or if the attorney has something else to add to it.
So I could
I'm
just
open to
comment. I don't think it's necessary that there be a continuance, or rather an extension granted at this point in time, unless the HRB is going to continue its hearing because it requires additional information before it makes a decision. Otherwise, if the HRB is able to make its decision and then it goes to the planning commission has the ability, as it did last time, to request an additional time to the 120-day period. And that's when the applicant can make the decision.
Okay,
Correct.
that's fine. I'll pass it off to the planning commission. Okay, thank you very much.
Excellent.
Continue. Does anyone else have any questions of staff at this time?
We're supposed to base this entire decision on 58.090, correct? The exception procedures?
Correct. Yeah. You're
And
essentially
no other information,
in what man? What do you?
context, past buildings.
I mean, the decision is, I mean, you've, this is within the context of your prior recommendation. So,
Okay.
I have some follow-up thoughts to some of the testimony. If I could just clarify a few things and remind the HRB of what happened in January as well. So I think just a few things. In terms of treating the third level, since there's a lot of discussion about what this is, staff very much, so back in January, staff was very adamant that this is a story per the definition of the CDC. Building code aside, so the zoning code treats this as a story, and that was our position then, and it remains our position on that. We also don't read this as being an accessory structure per se. if you look at the west facade, it's essentially a continuation of the first and second floor. So it's not like it's an isolated structure. It's integrated into the main building. There may be some nuances to that in terms of architectural construction, but it presents as a continuation. So we see it as a third story. Code does evolve. So to your earlier comment about how those prior applications came in, if you look at the ordinance history of Chapter 58, there are a lot of small revisions and a lot of different interpretations. In fact, the HRB amended it last year, I think, so to fix a few things, and we'll probably fix a few more after this application. But just to make things clearer, but again, staff hasn't tracked back each application and seen the code at this time, but we acknowledge the code does change over time. In terms of the rooftop, staff's position has been the deck is uncovered. It's a rooftop space. It's not a story. I mean, this is the deck itself. Our position is that the noise ordinance controls up there, and a rooftop patio is the equivalent to like a sidewalk cafe in terms of noise and appropriateness. The planning commission may feel differently, but this is staff's interpretation of things. I think use of the rooftops of historic buildings is a precedent around the country. I think locally, Revolution Hall is one example. If any you go to Portland, they have a rooftop space up there with an elevator. It's a way to expand the usable space of historic buildings. So, but again, it's sort of an outdoor space with an access elevator. I can think of examples in Cincinnati and Charlottesville, but those are less relevant to West Linn. But it is a way that historic buildings have been used to create public sort of outdoor space. Whether it's appropriate here is up to you, but we see it that way. I think also too, I didn't just for the audience here, I wanted to clarify my comments earlier about public testimony received. City staff does not dismiss public concerns about things like traffic or things like that. But again, we have to operate by approval criteria and approval standards, and the comments received were not directly relevant to the hearing tonight. They're much more relevant to the planning commission hearing and where issues of trip generation and parking come into play. But in terms of that, and I think my last point, and this may be just something where the applicant may need to clarify their plans, but both the eastern and western buildings adjacent to the outdoor deck are marked for storage. One is marked as equipment area, but / storage. So this may be something to clarify in terms of the use there, but there's space marked in there for maintenance supply. So this may be a versioning issue, but I just wanted to say the plans presented show both. So just a small clarification that if your decision hinges on that, you might want to get some clarification in the record about if your use of the area dictates your final decision. So I just wanted to call that out. But I think other than that, I think you have a lot of information in front of you, and you may just need to deliberate and figure out where you have areas of want in terms of information to judge against the standard. So thank you.
Thank you, John. Right. So if there's no other comments from staff or questions for staff, close this public hearing is now.
I have some comments. I know a lot of you are new on the board and haven't gone through a lot of these procedures, but it is not precedented for us to have any public comment. We usually have no one show up at any meetings ever. I mean, we're usually pretty lonely in here. The fact that the Willamette Neighborhood Association and basically I think every neighbor on 6 that is adjacent to this building have shown up is very significant. There's also a problem I've had with this board for a while. I am the only neighbor on this board. I'm the only person who lives in a historic district or in a historic home on this board. And it's part of the board's duty is to protect the historic district. And I've voiced this concern before with council that we need to have more representation of the neighbors on this board. So it's our duty to act as those neighbors to interpret the law that's written. And the reason that these laws were written is to protect the neighbors, to protect the historic district. And we need to keep that in mind. When we have a code that's strictly written in a particular way, we should follow that code unless there is an exception that can be found clearly that we need to be able to meet. So that's just my personal opinion. I live near this building. And as we heard from the neighbors, they're not opposed to construction of a new building. In fact, the previous building had no public comment against it. That was the previous building was built right next door to this one. There was no public comment against that building being built. There was 2 public comments, if I remember correctly, in favor of that other building being built. This is the first one that's had anything against it. So I think we need to take into consideration when we're considering the exception that there's a reason why there's an exception, and that's why the neighbors are not happy about this. So and then keep in mind that if we do approve it, the neighbors will more than likely, I can't guess it, but they have the option to be able to appeal this and take it back to council, and which will we be overlooked? We can be overruled at that point. So the neighbors do have that option to overrule us as well, to appeal us. So just keep that in mind. We're considering that option.
We do have a couple openings. We do have a couple openings that are coming up. So if there's anybody in the neighborhood that would like to be on the board, then please sign up. Yeah. So with that being said, on the other building, there was public comments against on that by the neighbors behind. I think they were in the 2 new houses that were right behind, with lighting and windows and things like that.
Not appealed, not with our drive purview.
No, it was in this.
We don't control lighting and we don't control noise. But I'm talking the historic, this is the first time we've had people who have been able to say a section of code that we actually answer to. Because we don't control sound, we don't control parking. That's outside of our purview.
I'm kind of torn. If the fit, form, and function of change, if storage is enclosed, I don't know what the neighbors are going to gain, to be honest. Okay, if it's still going to look the same by looking at it from the street or looking at it from your second window, still going to look the same with the way the building looks, then I would be in favor of storage. But it's not on the list of one of those things that we can approve for, one of the exceptions, mechanical, elevator, that kind of thing. So I'm definitely torn on that. So, yeah, I don't know at this point.
I think if you dig through the chapter 58 and look more closely at chapter 58, the intention of a roof is most of the roofs they talk about in 58 are gabled. So they can't use it as a rooftop space because it's a gabled roof. There are exceptions you can't have a flat roof, but it doesn't address that. Obviously, chapter 58 needs work, and we know that, and we're following to that exception. But I think it's fairly clear the intention is to use that as a 3rd floor space, whether it has a roof or not. And the intention, I think, of chapter 58 is to not have a 3rd floor space to be used. That's the way it's fairly strictly written in there, the 2nd floor. In fact, it actually doesn't even address, the chapter says that we can have windows on a 2nd floor. It doesn't say anything about putting windows on a 3rd floor. Actually, it says in there, windows on 1st and 2nd floor need to be a certain design. There is no design exemption because there's no 3rd floor. So having a 3rd section of windows, there's no code for that. They can't put a 3rd floor of windows because it's not even written in, or false windows or fake windows. It's just not even in the code. It doesn't even exist as an option. So, I mean, that'd have to be part of that exception that we'd have to put in there.
I think that's a disadvantage of our code that we hadn't foreseen. And, it's not in the historic character to have real or pretend 3rd floor windows. And that's an oversight.
It might be an oversight or it might be an intention. Maybe they just didn't want it. The people who wrote the code originally just don't want anything up there on that third level. They don't want to have that. But yeah, we need to address that in a whole different meeting.
And this is in a historic.
Yeah.
It serves a purpose.
But it's in a gable again, and it did talk about gables. It's not a flat roof.
Bet you we could find.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think it was not put in the code because it was going to say, no, you can't do it. Say, no, you can't. It's an overlook. People take advantage of that for good reasons to bring light into spaces. So.
Yeah, my 20 cents worth here. We are deciding, to me, we're deciding a very narrow issue here. The planning commission that's going to look at stuff. A couple things, generally speaking, for the exception, and I will suggest that I don't think presenting the comparables was very compelling to me. And the other option is, just paraphrase briefly, superior design, detail, or workmanship could be an example like, yeah, we're gonna fudge over here a little bit, but wow, look what you get over here. And I don't see anything like that in this building, where giving them this rooftop facility is offset by some other amazing thing about the building. And I think the rooftop facility for me is the challenge to deal with, because the other buildings of similar character and size, although this looks like this is going to present as a much more massive building than the others, is the potential for having, like I said, catering. You can have events up there. And yes, there is city code, but up till I think 10 o'clock, that could be really loud, et cetera, which is a very different element you're putting into the neighborhood than, it goes, to me, that element goes past worrying about, do we call it a floor, or we don't call it a floor, or what elevator. We would be allowing a very different element that does involve sound and so on. Yes, the city has codes, not our job, but I guess I'm unpersuaded that just the empowerment to make this exception, I don't find has been met. So I don't see how I can't vote for the exception because I don't even think they've met the criteria. And they've actually introduced another element that isn't precedent on any other building.
But we're not voting on the roof. We're voting on is a storage unit.
We're voting on an exception, correct?
No, where the exception is voting on this rooftop.
Yeah.
To be considered a HVAC storage, whatever, that's the exception. The rooftop patio is not part of our vote.
I'm not voting on the patio. I'm saying it says superior design, detail, or workmanship gives us the reason to have an exception. I don't think that's been met. They're not providing me with any superior design, detail, or workmanship.
What exception do you? That's what
That one. We haven't.
That's where I'm confused in what you're saying, because you're talking about noise and patio. I'm not talking about that. What we're talking about.
I'm talking
1,200 square foot space.
Okay, forget that comment. Go back to, I don't think we've met the two criteria to issue an exception.
For the 1,200.
For the, correct.
Okay. Just wanted to clarify that because.
And
that's what we're
my comment
for the third floor,
making a comment about a good or a bad idea. What my comment there is they're introducing an element that is not precedented anywhere else. So they don't have a precedent to show us because, oh, you have this feature. None of these other buildings have that feature. it's not a precedent. Maybe I wasn't clear.
No,
That's
a
my
fair
issue.
statement.
That's not a
where you got me
precedent.
confused was with the noise.
Okay, all right.
and
I
what's gonna
apologize
happen
if
up there
I,
Until 10 o'clock at night, and that storage building is gonna be quiet until 10 o'clock at night,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Hopefully.
so that, I guess that's where we had two possibilities. Show a precedent, which I don't believe they've done, and I don't see superior design, detail, or workmanship that would offset the decision. So I'm saying
No,
we haven't even met, to me, haven't even met the criteria to issue an exception. I don't think they met their burden to allow us to make it an exception.
Fair.
I'm sorry,
No, I just wanted to clarify.
that's the trouble with thinking off the top of your head. Sometimes you're not as clear as you think.
So my concerns, I'm gonna say this again. Building is gonna look the same if those other three walls are enclosed or not, okay? So let's say they have patio furniture up there, and I see this in my neighborhood where some people put their patio furniture away for the winter time, and some people cover it up with a blue tarp and a bungee cord, right? Well, that'd be uglier than this storage, right? And that's what I'm kind of, I'm torn because we could say, okay, they can't have storage. And then they say, okay, we're gonna blue tarp everything in the wintertime. And then your neighbors will see that because you might be able to see that out your second story window like you're concerned about, right?
I think what they're concerned is the fact that they're going to extend the parapet and put windows in it, make it look like a third floor. That's what the code says they're not supposed to do. And that is very strictly in the code. They can't put third floor windows, period.
But there's not a third floor.
It says second floor and other windows. It talks about second floor windows. It doesn't talk about third floor windows. And so
Okay, let's say that storage is not there, right? Because in some of our minds, that storage is considered a third, especially if it's not allowed as a maintenance structure or something like that, right? So that storage is not there as a third floor. Those windows are part of the second floor because they will look down on the second floor, right? Just like this is doing here. Again, this is an example of a peak, not a flat, but it would be this example. So it says no, third floor windows, right? But there's not a third floor. We're putting the part before.
but as John said, staff is considering it a third floor. And that's pretty clear that the experts are saying it's a third floor. You're saying it's not, but the staff has said it's a third floor. It looks like a third floor. When you walk by, you see 3 stories of glass. That's a third floor.
If that room is not.
Then that whole wall wouldn't need to be there. And we could, as the drawing, you can see there's a nice little parapet there at the second floor. They could cut the building there and not have to have that third floor extension on top. And then I don't think any of the neighbors would complain, and we wouldn't have countless people in here if they cut it right where that parapet is and not have that extension on top.
If that room, the footprint, the shape of the building.
Why though?
Yeah, it doesn't have to be.
No, it doesn't.
But it's their design. It's their.
Except for it's beyond the third
Probably
floor.
not much motivation to keep that exterior facade without that storage. I mean, it may be worth the expense to them for aesthetic reasons, but it seems unlikely.
Especially when there looks like the design of a mid parapet on second floor. At least from one of our
There's a couple things in this. A project like this is difficult because we have this municipal code, we have exceptions. I think this shouldn't even be in our purview personally. This should be a height, bulk, and scale thing that should be planning commission. With that said, can you pull up the exceptions that are currently being granted for this project? Because there's a lot that do not match 58.090, including vehicular parking. I couldn't imagine a podium parking being done in 1915. I'm not joking. Like, so if we're supposed to look at this thing as something that existed in 1880 to 1950, it's a little absurd. So
Sorry, a point of clarification. Did you want to pull up a list of
yeah,
the,
can, can you go to the exceptions currently being granted? Because you're not asking us to look at every exception for some reason, right? Even though that is what you stated in the beginning of the meeting, that is our purview to look at every single design exception, right? So new 3-story commercial cell, alley, underground parking, and then fiber cement board, 3rd-story mechanical equipment roof access.
Plus the demolition of 2 existing buildings.
Right. So, but 3rd-story mechanical equipment roof access, I mean, that couldn't possibly be done in 1880, 1950, right? So, I mean, it's just, the premise is silly. Right? Can we all agree on that? In the 21st century, the premise is silly. The exercise is an academic one. I think for me, if storage is an occupancy, it is a 3rd floor on a building code level. So I think I would just say no to that. And I think it'd be that straightforward for me.
And I just feel concerned that as soon as, if we were to grant it, everybody else will start jumping on it. It'll just be, oh, 3rd floor, we only want 3rd floors, and everyone's going to pop up 3rd floors, and or we could call them a extension of a rooftop, whatever they want to call it. But
can we agree that like the alley and underground parking, that wasn't even on our list?
no, we granted that last time.
But why? But, I mean, why?
Yeah, I know.
Right? You know, there's obviously contextual things that are happening all along the street that, you know, that are like a roof deck, but we're limited to this interpretation. Is that fair?
You could throw bike paths into that same comment.
Right. And so I would say like this body needs to uphold to this code. This is why I think this in general needs to be part of a planning commission. They have a little more leeway than we do, and that it's more appropriate. So, but I would say our purview would limit us to say, no, this isn't a 3rd floor, or this is a 3rd floor, so it shouldn't be because the code says it can't be, right? So I think it would be that quick.
Lynn, can you pull up this photo? It's a side view of 12th Street with the.
Yeah, it should be in the PowerPoint, so. It's, yeah. Is it, that's Willamette Falls Drive.
Yeah, that's the one I'm looking at.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
It's up there too.
So we just, you know, I'm talking about the right-hand side. And let's say that that's not a 3rd floor because we're not going to approve a storage in there, right?
Well, that's the 2nd floor. There's a volume, right?
Yeah.
In that thing. So it's transom windows, if you will.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
So it's a clear story.
Exactly.
So that portion, you know.
Take that away, you got a parapet right there, and you got an approved building.
Well, you don't have to take that away though, because.
Well, you do according to code.
No. If they're gonna leave the outside of the building looking the same, would you rather have it a flat front like the other 3, 4?
The area you're discussing isn't storage. Storage isn't on that facade.
Right.
It's around the corner.
That's what I'm saying. Those windows are going.
But I mean, do we want to have
Going down into the 2nd?
Correct.
Do we want to have a quick architectural discussion of what that facade probably should look like according to the code? Do that front one. I mean, do you guys care what an architect thinks? No, seriously.
I'm game.
So here, this front facade, right? The way the code's written, they're treating this as a singular building, right? And they're able to set their datum at the very center of the window, the door in the middle, right underneath 1949. And they're able to keep that continuously across all the way and act like this is a single building. How the code is written, every single one of these facades should be hitting grade. That has not happened once in downtown, right? Your 35 feet would not be a straight line. It would be a series of pushes and pulls. That's the way the code is interpreted. That's not how it's been executed. How is it fair for this body now to say, you know what, guys? Break every single one of these down. Can we? What your guys, some of these people on this commission are saying this needs to be definitively executed. It hasn't been at all.
And again, that's a problem with chapter 58, why we've been dealing with it for years. It needs to be
But
fixed.
look what the problem it creates though. You have
Oh, yeah.
multiple access angles. Like, so I have to go upstairs on the very far left. I have to go downstairs on the very far right.
Mhm.
I have accessibility only in one spot, and then I have to travel inside for everything else. So it's a huge accessibility issue. It's requiring me to do parking on below grade, which is fine. I mean, we live, with cars, and then everything's accessed from a middle point. But that's not how this code was written.
And again, that's something we need for a day for us to clean up the code.
But no code's gonna be perfect,
No.
right? So.
Yeah, chapter 58, again.
I don't know. So my interpretation of this is I can't allow the third, or I wouldn't say the third floor storage area is meeting, the spirit of this.
So I'd like to make a motion, if I could, to deny the application.
I would.
We can deny the application for
The
the
whole
third floor.
application?
That's our only choice.
I have a small purview here. Okay, go ahead.
To deny the application without the third floor, but that would be denying the application. Our only purview right now is on the third floor. John, is that our options?
Which criteria, well, you have discretion in this, and so
Okay.
I think if you go down that path, you need to identify which criterion's not met in terms of that. Occurs A or B, because they're requesting a design exception, and they've provided findings for two potential paths. There's the historic precedent path, and then there's the exceptional design path. And if you make a motion to deny, you have to identify the criteria and a finding as to why that's not met. And so I think that's if
Yeah, you
that
wouldn't deny the application.
No, you could
would
do that.
deny
you deny the design exception, correct? Yeah, the design exception would be, yeah. So
Which would be to recommend not accepting the application as is. Right?
Just we're recommending body back to the position that those exceptions aren't.
We've already approved exceptions that are out there, so you can't.
Yeah.
deny the
Yeah.
application.
Yeah.
What you do is you deny, you can make a motion to deny the story. or
Correct.
The storage on the roof of the second level.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Because it doesn't meet an exceptional design.
correct. And so the HRB is the decision-making body on this, and so you could leave the other design exceptions for material exceptions stand and have not been challenged or raised here. Again, it's the third story exception, which is what's being asked tonight. You are the final authority on this. It creates an awkward situation where the rest, because of this code quirk, we're in new territory a little bit. So, yeah.
So I will amend my motion. I guess it would be what it now deny the exception. Is that what we're phrasing this as?
Yes.
To deny the
Yeah,
exception
yeah.
then, on the grounds that they didn't meet A or B criteria.
I second the motion.
Well, we want discussion if we have any, but.
Is there,
If I could step in here really fast, is there additional information that may help evolve this decision, or is this a pretty clear code? I'm just putting this out there.
I'll always take information.
Yeah.
I take information, but I don't think I change my mind.
Okay. And that's fair. I just wanted to put that out there in case it was a matter of insufficient information. So, okay.
um, Member Steele?
I'm voting yes to deny the exception. We have this awkward, it's yes to deny the.
Member Solberg?
Yes to deny.
Member Salty? Member Schreiber,
Yes.
Chair Manning. All right, we have 5-0 to deny the design exception. Then there's a closing part that you should read, Chair Manning, thanking the people for attending.
Hello.
All right. We'd like to thank all who have testified tonight. Your comments have been very helpful. Thank you. If you'd like to appeal this decision to the City Council, you must file an application with the Community Development Department within 14 days of the signing of this final decision. Thank you.
Okay. Okay.
You guys don't want to stay for the rest of it? This is the fun stuff. Ice cream comes out. All right, so item number 6, discussion item, HRB input on the 2023 annual report to council.
Okay.
So, after all of this tonight
read
and,
that yet.
and for the last 10 years, Danny, right? We still need to work on the code and,
Yes.
chapter 58 in general.
Mhm.
I wouldn't say it's just chapter 58, but I think that would be a recommendation, if council wants to task us with something, it's,
Yeah.
we go through and maybe we have just a planning or a work session and say, these are the ones that we think we want to work on. And, maybe the planning commission helps us with that or what,
We probably have to kick it around first and then send it to
Send it
planning,
to
then
planning,
back. And
yeah.
then- And I've already, there's some things I'd like to move from 25 into 58 that I think would be
Yeah.
relevant and obvious and simple. Right, yeah, and we've talked about them before, so. And then some of the ideas that you're, bringing up about dealing with grade levels and other issues or,
Yeah.
there's a lot we can do in 58.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is that already in the, have you done a draft of the report yet?
I have not yet, no. So I wanted to sort of hear from you guys. I know that a lot of, the first part of this is usually how many meetings you had and things like that, but priorities, I really want to hear from the board because it's your priorities and what you want to ask for and work on.
In 58, we'll, to your concerns of, that we can address that, but I don't think that, the addressing of that is making each one of those individual because then
Yeah.
accessibility issues even become more difficult.
Yeah.
But that's not all where people are, are going to park. If you look at this. Yeah, because, you look at,
Which doesn't require parking.
which doesn't require parking. So they put, use this example, they're putting, 34 spaces down below.
Yeah.
And I think 8 of those are handicap or accessible spots.
I forget how many there are, but they're a number. Yeah.
So they're planning on putting people down below and running them up the elevator and walking on a flat floor each
Yeah.
one. So if we chop these buildings up,
Yeah.
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 Middle one's flat.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's not an easy fix, but yeah.
Yeah.
So those are things that on chapter 58 and, as Danny said, there's things in 25 that we could move to 58. There's things in 25 that we could just get rid of it.
Yeah.
Some of
I,
them.
I feel like the
Yeah.
CDC doesn't at all consider massive buildings.
Right.
It's for
No.
smaller scale buildings that we had.
Yes.
Yeah. And one thing that I want to address is, the state of Oregon has now told all the municipalities that they've got to, put ADUs in historic districts. They got to put as much square footage as they can on a lot.
Yes.
And, you've got these commercial buildings that you know, I don't know, why wouldn't they ask for 3 or 4 stories, right? If the
Yeah.
state's telling them to utilize your land the best you can, why wouldn't we make, why wouldn't we write the code for certain types of buildings or,
That is for housing though.
No, I know,
There,
but
there
that's,
isn't a big discussion about a shortage of commercial
no,
space right
and
now.
I'm 100% on board with that commercial because there's a glut of commercial everywhere right now.
Yeah.
But I could see a building going in that had commercial on the bottom and housing
Yeah.
on the top, or a commercial on the bottom and, a hotel on the top.
I would love to see that.
So that's something I think we need to look for, or look towards because it's coming, because we'll be sitting here in a year and a half, 2 years, 5 years, debating why we
So-
can't do it or why we shouldn't do it or shouldn't
Well,
do it,
and
right?
keep, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
but I
Well-
don't want to kick the can down the street because, before Danny, what happened? Danny took my spot.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
And I was on it for like 6 years prior to that, so, and my groups started working
58
on the
then.
code and then,
Yeah.
you got it and then I came back on and it was,
Yeah.
We haven't
we
done-
kind of
Yeah.
finished it up, right?
Yeah.
And, yeah, so.
Well, and there's also been other addresses too that we're dealing with right now is that we are losing our historic properties because of the code.
Mhm.
The code is written in there to have 0 lot lines, and if there's a house on it, it's got to be bulldozed
Exactly.
because that's the only option.
Yep.
You can't restore that house or make that house bigger because you have to bulldoze it, and that is not the intention of 58 when it was originally written. They wanted to protect those cute buildings, and there's a few little bungalows that are still in the neighborhood
Yeah.
that are not being protected, and
Fifth that just sold.
well, those are in the historic district, but
Yeah, but it was lot lined and.
yeah, I mean,
Really wouldn't have bought it.
I'm talking about the ones that are on Willamette Falls Drive on 58 Purview.
Yeah.
We need to protect those. Oh, Tom's got his hand up.
Tom?
Are you there, Tom?
Yes.
Oh, you were just talking about hotels and stuff like that, and it's there's nowhere except Airbnbs and VRBOs in West Linn, right? And so Handris in their building adjacent to the one that you guys were talking about today, they attempted to put a hotel in there. They attempted to do housing in it as well. It didn't work out for like probably financial reasons, but there's been attempts down where in the hole where there's 4 stories of storage and a beautiful building down there right along Willamette Falls Drive, just east of town. That could have been a hotel. So there's been
Yeah.
attempts at it. There's been attempts at it, but
Tom,
Andrews-
that's a great
Andrews
point.
tried. Andrews tried.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Tom. If that building could have had another floor, it might have penciled out for a hotel. It might have penciled out for, apartments or whatever, right? But you're very correct when you say that, because I think that was on. Were you?
Mm-hmm.
That was like
Yeah.
their first design phase
Yeah.
was potential hotel upstairs, right? And
Yeah.
it just didn't pencil out because of the square footage, But if they had, if they had retail and offices and a hotel, it might have penciled out,
Yeah.
And I don't want to overlook that because I know.
No, but I'll tell you what. I've been down in Eugene quite a bit. 'Cause
We
I've got
still have some input on here, so.
So one of the things, John, that I would like the council to consider, that I personally would, is I want to get some direction on getting more historic properties on protection.
Okay.
There are houses in town that fit within the range that
Yeah.
could be considered historic that don't have a clear and easy path. And I
Yeah.
mean a clear and easy path
Yeah.
versus having to jump through a bunch of red tape to get protected under Chapter 25.
Okay.
And I know I brought this up before, but I would like to make that a goal for this
Yeah.
group, is to try to add some. I've talked to other historic boards in other cities,
Mhm.
and some members have been proud that they've added 5 houses onto their historic
Mhm.
registry, or
Mhm.
10 houses or whatever.
Yeah.
Right. So,
Yeah.
well, McLean House is locally protected. It's not nationally. I'm talking local protection.
Actually, so we are working on a National Register
Right.
nomination for that.
McLean, but
For that, we've also, we've had one workshop to help people research the history of their home. We have a second one coming up in February, if anyone's interested. Speak to Lynn about getting on the list.
Yeah.
For that.
So I do want to comment that our first workshop, I don't know if I was able to give you guys a rundown on it. We had, I think we had about 25 people sign up, but probably only 14 people came. And there were a couple people that I felt were very interested in pursuing national registration. And the person had already done quite a bit of research, a lot of interviews of previous homeowners and things like that, and collecting photos and things like that. But she was asking for guidance on doing additional research and how to actually write an application. So I do think there's some people who are interested, but nobody signed up for the consultation, the free consultation with the consultant afterwards. So we still have that time open. And I don't know, I haven't reached out to them to find out if they want to or not, but we do have another workshop that we scheduled for the last Tuesday in February. We wanted to give them a little bit of time. And that's going to be in the council chambers in the evening. And that's just to give people a different time to come. And it's the same materials, but I think we'll probably hone the discussion a little bit better. One of the things we did need to make clear in the workshop was that there was two paths. One was local landmark status, and the second was national register status. I think people got a little freaked out about how hard it was to get a national register status. But I think if we lead with local registration, and I think that people can see an easier path, and that's where they might request partnership with the city to walk themselves, because it's basically a land use application like we've just had, but probably not as hard. But anyway, so that and I can answer any questions if you have any.
I think local path.
Especially as we're looking at more freeway access, expanded roads and other things. And
Yeah.
I also, as part of that, and what leads into that next session is I'd love to have the council consider possibly offering grants again. Because as we get more and more people wanting to be on the historic protections, we could offer them some help in paying for those super duper expensive wood windows and all those things like that. And I know in the past we stopped doing it because people stopped taking advantage of it. We offered 2 rounds of grants and we had 0 applications. Because it just we weren't doing an active job of outreaching and letting people know about it as much. And we had some struggles, and I don't know if the struggles have changed, but part of if you look at the CLG grant, you have a 6-month period. You have to have the project approved, finished, and apply within 6 months. And if you've ever worked with a contractor, that's very hard to do.
Yeah.
COVID hurt us on that too.
Yeah, and that hurt us a lot. So I don't know if there's any ways around that yet, but that would be something that'd be nice to have that offered again, I think, the grants. Especially when we have homeowners who are offering to do windows. Windows are a great thing to help them with, to pay for those windows to make them look better.
The city helping with it.
It's our CLG, yeah. But the city
the city would have to match it 50%.
The CLG requirements say it has
Yeah, it's just that it has to be done within a time frame, and it's usually about 18 months. So once we get the grant, then we'd have to go out and they'd have to have an approved project, and then they have to complete the construction. So it's very, very difficult. That's why we'd have to preload it. So we'd actually have to pretty much have them ready to go. So once we got the money, then we'd award it. Tom Watton has a comment, I think, about this.
You guys are talking about CLG grants. So I think we're moving towards the board comments. So Jody Carson is somebody that most of us all know. She's a longtime resident and member of the Main Street. And actually, and Danny, I mean, you probably could tell me all her credentials, but that's fine. I've been sucked into a couple other committees and things like that. And she asked me the other day, she goes, the Main Street wants to do 3 more of the bronze signs on historic buildings. They are 5 to 6. There are 5 to 6 already in place. And they have funds from WNA and others. We have two more sites we want to do. The Cap-On, and I'm sorry if I'm saying that incorrectly,
Capon Shoe
Shoe
Company.
Factory on the at the Connor Church, and the garage. The signs cost around 1,400 a piece. I think these and maybe some other buildings in West Linn could be a great project for a CLG grant. Thank you for your consideration. That's from Jody personally.
Yep.
So
Yeah, she reached out to me on that also. I think they have one for Capon already because she asked me if I would install it for her, so. Sure. Hey, I got a hammer drill if I need. Yeah.
she asked me to bring that up in tonight's
Yep.
meeting, so that's for all to hear.
Thank you, Tom. All right, so item number 7, any other items of interest? I think we're into that already. Items of interest from the staff?
Let's see here. No new applications in the pipeline that will be coming before you. So I think it's actually a relatively quiet period for the HRB. I know we had a lot queued up with this and the window replacement. And I think there's one person working on a local listing, at least I've talked to. So, I think that's generally at the waterfront project is progressing along. Draft concept plans should be circulated out in the public over the winter. So that obviously that planning area encompasses some historic structures. So we'll be putting that out there. As a reminder, that work is based upon public outreach done pre-pandemic. So the idea is this is a big public check-in going, this is what we heard, but the world's kind of changed. So we're going to, we're revisiting all that. So we're not wasting past work. We're just building upon it. Highway 43 project is also kicking off as well. There are a few historic resources along Highway 43. So more sort of individual homes, some really fascinating ones, especially the one with USS Oregon.
Yeah.
Fittings inside of it. There's a radio room in back where it's the listing. It's wild looking at that listing. So, but there's those properties are less likely to be affected because those are all residential, but it's still there. I think in terms of just following up on your earlier comments, just a couple of things. In terms of more residential in Willamette, some of you, actually, I think most of you were not on the board at the time, but there was one residential conversion of a second-story commercial space in Willamette. It's the
Hometown Sports.
Hometown Sports. Yep. So that conversion did happen. So that more could happen on that. So just maybe something to revisit. Also, if in lieu of a full code rewrite, which can take a while, HRB could also, maybe we could have conversations about interpretation in the meantime, in terms of like, have we been applying this consistently and whatnot, especially with new members and new specialties, new just perspective. So just a thought, but in terms of that, there's I think, but in terms of upcoming projects, I don't see a lot for your purview. So it could be a good time to revisit some of the other work. And as Chair Manning said, we are taking applications. I think we have 3 positions coming open or 4 maybe even, and we don't have enough applicants. Last check, we had more positions than applicants. So I think that's just something to come up. So,
John, is there any update on that Beckman Stone project? I know the Historical Society reached out about that historic stone over by New School.
So I think I tried to connect the parties, and I haven't heard much since then.
Okay, because the last I heard is they wanted to put some sort of, and as a reminder, this is that stone that talked about the explosion.
Yes, yeah.
About moving it into a safe space to protect it, and then making some sort of interpretive sign to explain what this is. And it sounds like PGE is okay with moving it. They don't care. We just need to find a place for it.
PG, as I understand, doesn't care. They aren't fond of official public access onto their property, but I think they would facilitate relocation with the school
Because
district.
technically now that road has been given back to
Correct.
the homeowner down there.
Yeah.
It's there's a big fence nobody can really get down to it anymore.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Jeez.
Because down where the road dead ended, it was right behind that guardrail.
Yeah.
What's that?
And,
Yeah.
you know, as John, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
so there's going to be a new roundabout being built right there, and they're going to have some heavy equipment there. It would be very easy with an excavator to sling that thing
Yep.
right next to the walking path. And
Yeah,
they can
yeah.
do whatever they want to it later on,
Yep.
right? Because
Fair enough.
where it's at right now, it's, you know, you have to know where it is to see it,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
I have a picture of it on my phone.
Yeah. So I think really
Now it's technically on 2 pieces of private property, so.
yeah, that's true. So I think the city is happy to facilitate that, but I think really the conversation has to be the school district and PGE in terms of like, and, you know, but
Well, technically, if they put it along the path,
yeah.
that's city property.
Right.
So.
Or move it over to Fields Bridge area where the other.
And I'll put it right on that new path, you know how they did
Oh,
that
yeah.
little, because then the math still works.
Yeah, 'cause it's right there.
then
Yeah.
scripture
Yes,
says,
exactly.
you know, 150 yards from here, there was an explosion and their bodies are buried 400 yards from
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
And now
Yeah.
we're only 20 yards off, so, you know.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, you know, you could put it in a
Exactly.
box if you want. You
Yeah.
know, I don't know.
Yeah.
No, but that stone though, one thing beauty about that stone is
Heavy.
somebody chipped all that in there to write it. So even if somebody did paint it, it could be, you know, you could still.
Sandblast it.
You
Yeah.
can still see the engraving, so.
Yeah.
Exactly. All
So
right.
the historical side might ask for some partnership on that.
Of course, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, we talked to, who was the guy that came and talked to us, but you were out. He came and talked.
Mark, maybe?
Yes, it was Mark.
Oh, Mark. Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
it was Mark. And we said we would help. We're not going to take it on, but if you want some help, let us know how we can
Yeah.
help. And then that's how John got
Okay.
all parties together.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but,
And then speaking of which, I think you're all aware of this, but an involved party of the city would be the Parks Department, and Ken Warner's retired.
Yeah.
And now Megan Big John has replaced him, so she comes to us from like Oswego.
Okay.
But in case you have any reason to reach out to the Parks Department, Megan is the person to talk to now.
I'll still call Tara.
She is a Westland resident, so, yep.
So that actually leads me to another question. What's the status of McLean House for actual use of the public? Is there going to be a building that can be accessed in a historical way?
I don't know if that's been determined
Okay.
yet. I think it's because of the ODOT construction that's been, and the dissolution of the Friends. I think it's sort of one of those things the Parks Department is taking. I'm sure that's on Megan's long list of things to do. So, but
I think I would love to put that on also if we're going back to the annual report. I still have concern about the use of that historic property for after-school kids programs and
Yeah.
things like that, which are not going to protect the historical nature of the home
yeah,
and
Grounds.
or
Yeah.
grounds. It's pristine. Well, it was pristine when the Friends left,
yeah,
And now it's not.
and it's so
It's not into the normal park rotation
Yeah.
of maintenance.
and
So
I
it's-
I saw they're doing like projects in there with after school. I love kids after school programs, but that's
Yeah.
not the space that we should be doing after school kids programs in there.
okay.
Um,
Well, yeah, I would reach out to the Parks Director on that if you maybe. Yeah.
Right, we've got other places for that.
But-
And I mean, it's a beautiful building, but it should be,
Yeah.
protected for historical purposes.
But if that's something the HRB wanted to raise as a potential
Yeah.
issue, that's something we could include.
That's a good spot.
Okay.
Especially since we're doing all the effort and make it a national.
Yeah,
registry.
that building was way too nice to let it fall, disrepair and damage from wrong use.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, number 9. Adjourn.
We are adjourning at 9:15.
Nice. Hey, Bill, stay on. You and I talked about that guy that has that house or had that house on 43, and now he lives in Milwaukee with all the Oregon artifacts from the battleship Oregon. You knew the gentleman that lived in that house on 43 that had the battleship Oregon stuff, right? Didn't we talk about that?
Don, do we have a
No, I
different
don't-
meeting then?
Huh. How about, can you call me later?